keep flowing in, so we encourage you to go to the middle and appreciate you being here on time. This afternoon, we have our first of our plenary sessions, which Ray Williams will be introducing the speakers, and also moderating, and it's about vital signs, the art, empathetic communication, and patient care. Very important topic. Over our lunch today, several of us were in fact talking about how does this all translate really into the practice of patient care, which is the ultimate goal of our work. We just want to remind you, which Carrie or Wendy will do at the end, that the breakout sessions will follow. There is an actual break, so we encourage you to enjoy that and come back. So with that, Ray, thank you very much.
All right, at the risk of seeming less gracious than some of my colleagues, I am going to be very brief in introducing this distinguished panel. And first, moving from right to left, is Dr. Ricardo Wellisch, and he has been a sort of long-time teaching partner for me through Harvard Medical School, and especially in the years when I was working at Harvard Art Museums, although I still get to come up to Boston and do some teaching with Rick, so that is delightful. An amazing museum educator, Ruth Slavin, who is representing the University of Michigan Museum of Art, and her teaching partner, Dr. Joel Howe, also from the University of Michigan School of Medicine. So, our goal for you is to leave feeling maybe a little bit inspired and confident that you can try this at home, right? So we want to help you visualize what some of this teaching looks like. And we're going to try to do that in various ways, recognizing that in some ways this gathering represents sort of two cultures coming together. Sometimes we dress differently, sometimes we use words differently. We are not going to get into a tussle about the definition of the word empathy, okay? There are some disciplinary differences in how we use language, and this kind of collaboration demands generous listening. The other thing that we have in common is both of our home domains have some barriers to this kind of collaboration. The medical domain is so worried about covering the material and cramming it all into the curriculum that it's hard for them to justify springing students and residents from clinical duties or from the classroom to have a museum experience. One of the implications for me as a museum educator is I feel like it's a very legitimate question that I must be able to respond to is how is this relevant to the practice of medicine? These are driven, busy, tired people who are not coming for an art history lecture. They're coming for a museum-based workshop that is professionally relevant. So that is a guiding principle for me. On the museum side, there can be institutional resistance to the idea that we're doing anything besides introducing people to art history. Okay? So collaboration means listening and flexing. And this area of collaboration, I think, is very, very exciting. I want to launch with a teaching story. This is an amazing work of art from 4th century BCE in the collections of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. You should think of it as the lid of an Etruscan sarcophagus. And we always start by looking. And in this teaching story, I'm working with a group of internal medicine residents who are participating in a medical humanities course. And we are enjoying the treasures of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts that Brooke Evans talked a little bit about, that lesson plan. But this was a pivotal conversation for me as an educator. We started by looking and noticing It's a couple. They're lying down as if in bed, covered by a stone sheet. Now, this is no Greek couple. They don't have heroic, idealized bodies. They have regular, middle-aged bodies. They've been sleeping together and loving each other for a lot of years, right? And the artist is showing that. And when you think about the function of the object itself, they want to be buried together. So I'm looking at this object in a very quiet room at the MFA, and the interns are talking about what they see and what they can discern about this relationship and maybe a little bit about Etruscan culture. And then I say, so I picked this work because I thought it might resonate with clinical experiences that you're having. And there was this silence. And I'm good at silence, but I said, but you know, sometimes my hunches are wrong. Maybe it wasn't a good choice. And somebody said, no, it's very relevant. Just this week, I was walking down a corridor in the hospital and passing by one of my patients' rooms, and her husband came bursting out of the room into the corridor and sort of ran into me. And he had tears in his eyes, and I knew what had happened. The attending physician had just told him that his wife of 50 years was going to die. And he recognized me as his doctor. And I was supposed to know what to say. But I'm only 26. I felt so inadequate in that moment. And it was quiet. And then everybody else in the group, there was this murmur of affirmation, like, yes, we understand that experience. That feeling of inadequacy is not unique. And you can make your own conclusions about what that has to do with empathy and self-care and patient care. But I wanted to start by giving you some imagery about this kind of teaching in a museum context. So, Rick?
Good afternoon. First, I hate to contradict my fabulous teaching partner, Ray, but let me show you a little bit of a roadmap for our conversation from my perspective as a physician and a medical educator. First, I do want to introduce, I guess, a definition of empathy in the medical arena and the historical journey of this concept. And thank you. And the medical literature is entering a new generation in empathic thinking, and I want to describe some of the concepts that have unfolded. And finally, and perhaps most importantly for our audience, I will describe the ways in which the art museum and art have become an invaluable tool to teach, learn, and experience empathy, wellness, and resilience. So if you remember nothing else about my words, just remember the following. Think less, feel more. That's one of the goals in our collaborative museum visits with the medical residents. And let me explain this a little further. In medicine, empathy is defined perhaps slightly different than in other fields. Until several decades ago, in the 70s, there existed a very palpable tension in the physician's role, and Dr. Katz this morning alluded to that in one of the images he presented. On one hand, doctors would strive for detachment in order to more reliably and objectively care for all patients, regardless of personal feelings. On the other hand, doctors are moved by patients' narratives, and we are welcomed into our patients' journeys. Patients want treatment with emotionally engaged practitioners, and we truly want to deliver it. It was not until the late 70s that the biopsychosocial model of medical care was written about and taught. The concept was simple, and its absence in the past striking, really. We realized we care not only about the physical exam and data and lab values, but also about the psychosocial context of our patients in order to make appropriate diagnoses and inferences for treatment. The biopsychosocial model evolved from the previous biomedical model. Empathy comes from the German word Einfühlung, to feel with. It is known in non-medical spheres essentially as an affective mode of understanding, feeling with someone, being moved by another's experiences. In contrast, in medicine, empathy has been defined conceptually as the act of correctly acknowledging the emotional state of another without necessarily experiencing that state oneself. Furthermore, in order to achieve empathic communication, we think of it as a two-limb connection. I need to understand you, and you need to know that I understand you. In other words, if I don't express a set of verbal and nonverbal cues about the patient's feelings and situation, the patient will never know that he or she is fully understood by the clinician. Over the last 15 years, empathy has become a core value in the care of our patients. Ample studies cited in the literature support that empathic communication leads to more satisfied patients, more satisfied clinicians, better adherence to treatment plans, more efficient and more timely patient-clinician encounters. Clinical research studying aspects of empathy has included studies of the neurologic connections, like a gentleman early this morning alluded to as what was on his mind, neurologic connections between empathy and positive emotions, nonverbal communication and its effect on empathic communication, and experiential learning that fosters empathy through a variety of activities and exercises. Literature supports that empathy is teachable and learnable. In the Art Museum, medical educators have taken advantage of the power in observation to teach critical thinking and to teach accuracy in the physical examination of patients. Studies in visual thinking strategies presented validated data as a set of specific questions that are utilized over and over again to prompt trainees to look deeper and justify their answers. And similar techniques, interestingly, are used when we teach medicine in the outpatient setting. So how are experiences with art in the museum environment useful in developing empathy and empathic communication skills among medical trainees? The hospital environment is immersive. It offers an overwhelming volume of new information, an extremely steep learning curve, and a steady stream of intense life or death situations. And in those times, it is actually quite difficult to stop and reflect on deeply moving experiences and process them, so they can be filed as a repertoire that translates into emotional intelligence to be referred to in the future. By contrast, the Art Museum offers an environment that is calm, different, beautiful, and quiet. In the museum, we challenge our residents to think less and feel more. Parker Palmer, a sociologist and teacher, coined a term called the third thing. The third thing becomes the piece of art that is being studied. Learners describe what they see in a piece as they consciously or unconsciously bring to light their own opinions, feelings, and values. The conversation weaves in and out between what is seen and what is felt, and art becomes the vehicle that allows that flux. Art, like patience, is created within a social framework. Yet, unlike patience, art does not talk back, does not get annoyed if we stare at it a moment longer than appropriate, and it invites a line of inquiry that does not have to follow protocol. Finally, we are free of any concern that the process of reflection in the museum will be interrupted by a critical emergency. Utilizing the knowledge from our predecessors who have studied the development of empathy, we have developed an expanded curriculum that facilitates close observation and a discussion of themes that are relevant to the humanistic aspect of doctoring. We have developed a blueprint that we use to weave through any topic we want to approach with our trainees. We develop curricula for conversations around death in a young patient, for example, for learning how to deliver bad news or news of impending death to a patient or their family. And around this structure, we have facilitated modules that explore how to talk with a depressed patient, how to understand differences in race and ethnicity in the medical setting, how to think about cross-cultural issues in pain management. But then a second generation of themes emerged after a few years in parallel to the formative development of physicians in training. We began to think not only of empathic communication between physician and patient, but also of the physician's need for self-care and concern. Our understanding of the negative impact of the well-documented erosion of empathy that takes place during medical training led to new thinking about preventing burnout in medical trainees and practitioners. A seminal study by Dr. Lisa Bellini of the University of Pennsylvania demonstrated in striking numbers the development of depression, anxiety, depersonalization, and cynicism in trainees. An all-time low was reached at the end of internship, and recovery was not uniform by the end of 3 years of postgraduate or residency training. The erosion of empathy led to understanding about burnout. The early antidote to burnout emerged in the literature 10 years ago, known as wellness, and subsequently the newer generation term resilience. And resilience, of course, is defined as the ability to stand firm and stand whole in the face of adversity. So, in turn, we developed new museum sessions with appropriate curricula and a focus of mindfulness, wellness, and resilience. We explicitly celebrated the courage demanded by medical practice. We now provide opportunities for our residents to delve into what makes them whole again, what allows them respite, and will lead to recovery of empathy and their renewed commitment to caring for people. We encourage residents to build their own plan for wellness, to discover what keeps them whole and grounded, so that their caring of individuals will possess warmth and a soul, complementing the science and medical advancements. I personally am very grateful that art museums and museum educators have included in their mission the training of medical professionals and their development of a core value in doctoring. Discovering the art museum for its academic richness and its magic, as well as partnering with amazing museum educators who share my vision, has been an incredible experience, and I thank you all for it.
The erosion of empathy. That phrase just caught my attention. And I thought, what a challenge to have a partner who says, what could we do in an art museum that might counter the erosion of empathy? And I thought, that's a great question. Let's think about that. It's always great when somebody gives you a big question. So this is a little bit, for those of you who want this sort of grounded in some sort of logistics, this is about the relationship with Dr. Wellish and Mount Auburn Hospital and our goals, empathic communication, self-awareness, and self-care. The participants are residents in internal medicine. And 6 two-hour sessions a year is the format. It's been going on for about 9 years now. And here are some of the sample themes. It's beautiful, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. I also don't want you to think I'm only fascinated by ancient sculpture. I like ancient stories too. I want to elucidate the blueprint that Rick referred to, because in a way we sort of have an established model. And I think, in terms of inspiring you to go home and try this, I'll just tell you what a typical outline looks. Of course, you all will invent variations on the theme, as we do almost every time, but we choose a theme. We negotiate a theme like sharing bad news. And then my job is to find a work of art that will sort of powerfully open up the conversation on that theme. And typically, we convene with an interpretive conversation about that work of art that is skewed and led towards an explanation of the medical theme, medical aspects that we're trying to get to. So we have a key work, an interpretive conversation, usually lasts about 20 minutes. Often there'll be a gallery activity of some sort, and I'll give you an example of a gallery activity, and Ruth has several more, plus handouts. And then Rick usually brings a 3 or 4 page article. Sometimes it's from journalism, a newspaper article, but more often it's from the medical literature. There was no homework. They didn't read it ahead of time. We sit right there in the museum and read this 3-page article, and then he facilitates a conversation. But it's obviously same theme as we've just been having in the art conversation. And then most sessions end, and I want to credit my colleague Corinne Zimmerman, who really institutionalized this idea of ending with a piece of reflective writing. And usually there's a prompt, and there's 10 minutes, and we really invite the students to sort of reflect on the whole of the experience and make connections to their own. Again, I've heard several people say this, and I would underscore it too. At several points, we might ask the question, what does this have to do with your clinical experience? What do these skills that we're doing here have to do with being a doctor? So I want to give you 2 examples, and one is a gallery activity. We call this the group poem. And so here's a work of art to look at. You've been looking at it for a while. It's a grave stele of a girl. We know her name, even though she's from ancient Greece. Her name is Mellisto. And we know a little bit about her. She liked dogs. So in the group poem, everybody has to write just one sentence. And for this prompt, I say, talk a little bit about infant mortality rates in ancient Greece, how, amazing it is to get to 5 years old and then lose your daughter. To imagine that loss, and what might Mellisto's parents have said to one another in the weeks and months after this devastating loss? What might people say to their partners in the face of such a tragedy? Write it down in one sentence. And I pass out a little strip of paper. Everybody writes down one sentence. And then I say the next step is read your sentences aloud to see what raw material you have. Now negotiate a sequence. As you hear these sentences, listen for what feels like a beginning or an end, and negotiate what order you're going to put these in, and then perform it aloud twice so we can savor it. So here's one poem about Mellisto, about what her parents might have said to comfort one another. I'll always remember the day we got that puppy, and he ended up sleeping on Mellisto's pillow. The world was a happier place when Mellisto was alive. The time she had was filled with such joy. How can I move on when it was not her time? I am so sad. I wish that she was here with us. We hope our daughter has crossed the river. Okay. So think about the skills involved. Look, imagine yourself in somebody else's situation, generate language, negotiate a sequence in collaboration, which is also about being very sensitive to language. So empathic communication. And the last thing I'll do is share some of the reflective writing. And I think this reflective prompt was, imagine yourself in the future, after you're through with your training and you're attending, what advice might you have for medical students? And some of these are real attendings and some of these are real medical students, but they're all sort of responding in this way. Responding to loss and grief is scary because you don't quite know how to react. You feel that nothing you say can really address the magnitude of their loss, but I think it doesn't matter if you don't say the perfect thing. It's most important that you are there physically and continue to look them in the eye rather than showing fear and looking away. So very practical. In contrast to the world of the Greeks, where typhoid raged and infant mortality was so high, we live in a world that gives strong messages of invincibility. We lack the rituals and often the common experience of comforting those with loss, witnessing pain and grief. But one of the most powerful things we can do for our patients is to sit with that pain and loss. What is common to you, speaking to a future medical student, what is common to you is often uncommon to each of your patients. A death from a heart attack may be a daily to weekly event in the hospital, but is often a single event for that family. And I think this is an argument for using your words carefully and being aware of what role you're going to play in this family's story. When talking to patients about death and loss, remember how scary the medical world seemed to you before becoming a doctor, and how overwhelming it feels to first step into that world. Multiply that feeling times 10. That is how the average patient feels in these situations. Scared. Okay, so again, imagining the patient's experience. Empathy.
Hi, I'm Ruth Slavin. I feel like we've already been given so much to think about that it seems weird to just start talking again, actually, but I'm going to do it. So Ray asked me to give specific activity examples, and also I wrote everything down on a handout. So everything that comes out of my mouth, I can't promise will actually be on that handout, but all prompts, all the structure, the kind of art we used, et cetera, how that experience was designed is all on there. It's at the back of the room, and I'm told that later it'll be at the registration table. So I'm going to go through 3 activities, so of necessity I'm going to skim a bit. I'm sorry, let me open my laptop again. So the first activity, I also want to shout out to Joel Howell. I've worked for about 7 years with medical students and physicians. I've partnered with different physicians. As Ray and Ricardo described, it's a design partnership, so you think about the kind of experience you want to have. I over-prepare on the art part so that my teaching practices, really information only comes in as needed, but I am super prepared. They have no idea the broad circle of information that I've amassed, and I only pull it out if it's relevant or needed. And otherwise, like Ray said at lunch, our teaching looks the best when it looks like we're not doing anything. Okay, maybe that's a little bit exaggerated, but those, the museum educators are nodding their head, because if you can step back and the experience is happening, you're doing a good job. So Joel is the physician that I've partnered with the most over the last 7 years in many different contexts. And the context I'm going to focus on first is that our medical school is redesigning their curriculum. And part of that redesign is to create paths of excellence, which are sort of like minors that people follow through medical school, but it's a 4-year experience with a capstone, so it's pretty substantive. And this year we did the proof of concept kind of teaching for the students. So we had 4 sessions: visual arts, creative writing, history, and medical journalism or journalism. And we really felt the burden of, I think, what Ray said, which was, why are we doing this? Like, what can we say about why we're doing it? And in talking with Joel, we decided that what the rationale we were going to represent was, what kinds of thinking got you here to medical school? Often analytical, you're really good students, et cetera. What kind of thinking or thought processes or observation processes make you a good doctor? So what do you have to add to your toolkit? And it's more elaborated on our handout, the kinds of, we list them, the kinds of thinking, and why we think the arts can help with that. So anyway, the first activity, let's look at some art, was, okay, for me, museum educators, I had to leave the museum. I was invited to go to the medical school. It was great, it was really an honor, but I was like, I don't want to go to the medical school because I have to use slides and work in a medical school classroom. I thought they'd be paved with gold. They're really not. They're just like regular classrooms. And it was very hard for me, so I really slaved over the choice of objects that could work in a slide as a slide, discussion, and I insisted on having a room with excellent projection for the slides that was really clear, and also where we could break into small groups. So everyone spent most of the time in a group of 5 to 8 students, and that was super important to me. Sorry, gotta catch up with myself. Right, so these were not presented in this manner. They were presented one at a time. And the one on the left, so those of you from Harvard will recognize as pertaining to the Harvard Art Museum's collection. It's called Young Man with Death. It was painted between 1856 and 1865. And in the original title was included a dedication to the memory of Theodore Chassereau, who was the painter's teacher, one of his teachers, and who died relatively young, relatively early. And so we told the students that both works dealt with mortality and relative youth. So they got that general introduction. And then I just gave you the information that I gave them. And then I'm going to talk about the second work and what I told the students, and then tell you the kinds of questions they had to contend with. So the second work on the right was on view at University of Michigan Museum of Art, UMA, where I work, in January when we did this POE, Introduction, Path of Excellence. And it was displayed as you see. This is a installation shot at the museum. And I don't know if you can see that it's a pile of candy. It's a candy work by the artist Felix Gonzalez Torres, who was born in Cuba, raised in Puerto Rico, and ended up living in New York City and in Los Angeles. He did 19 candy pieces in his lifetime. He was known for, this is what I told the students, he was known for using everyday ordinary objects to make art. And 19 of these candy pieces had a name in parentheses. And really the work is a set of instructions. So a museum or an owner, what the owner buys or the museum has is a set of instructions that says, ideal body weight of the healthy male, or this one's called Untitled Dad, 1991, and the weight is 175 pounds, I believe that's correct. And we have no instructions about when to replace the candy. And then I showed them a comparative slide, which was for Felix Gonzalez Torres' lover, Ross. And that one is very bright, jewel-colored pieces of candy. I don't have that here. And it said replenish constantly. So I gave them that to work with, right? Because you can see a lot of the symbols in the allegorical painting, and people can kind of, start to break that down. But I thought they need a little more information. So that was the information they received. And we gave the groups a guided looking sheet and big, giant, detailed color copies so they could look at it without having to look at the screen all the time. But the screen stayed up. And these are the questions. These are sort of merged. They were slightly different for each work, but this was the guided looking. Discuss your initial reactions. Do you think the objects or their arrangement are intended to be meaningful or symbolic? What ideas, experiences, stories, or questions come to your mind as you look at this? Why do you think the artist, this was obviously for Felix, why do you think the artist wanted the visitors to be invited to take a piece of candy, but only to take one? That's the label. What messages does this painting convey to us about life and death? About halfway through, I circulated to kind of follow the infusion of information philosophy, and I said to the group, and I kind of, played it up a bit, what one piece of information or one question would your group agree would most help you right now? So I was also kind of trying to model the idea of maybe a little bit of a relationship to doctoring, where you form some ideas, but you need more information. What is that? But they had to talk about, no, that's not the most important thing. Don't use up our question on that. It was kind of fun for me. And I also gave them a pile of candy from the actual installation. And they all said, like kids, is this the real candy? And I was like, yeah, it is. So they could just unwrap it if they wanted and put that little bit of sweetness, on their tongue and have an experience. So then after 25 to 30 minutes, Joel and I, who were going to move back into co-teaching, he had done the intro and talked about doctoring, what we're going to do, what we're going to do. We asked them this. We want you to share the direction of your discussion. You don't have to have reached a consensus. You don't have to like the work. You don't have to have a definitive understanding. You can talk about both works in a comparative manner. You can talk about one. But we want you to capture your thought process. That's what's important to us. So then they did that. Initially, we didn't, I'll speak for me, I didn't quite trust that the first year students would really dig in and that they would have a rich and deep discussion. I was nervous. I was not on my own turf in the museum that I'm so comfortable with and love. And so Joel, when we debriefed after time one, he's like, we talk too much. And I'm like, okay, great. We won't talk as much. So then time two, we talk less. And we really worked on leaders on silence. Ray already mentioned that. And on wait time. And each session, the discussion was better as we learned to trust that the students really could do this in a medical school classroom with an image, with our photocopies, and it was really wonderful. And I think Joel may comment further. How am I doing? I have like 1 minute left. Okay, great. So really quickly, and I do have this great handout at the back. At the back of the room, it'll be second activities done in our study rooms with photographs. I pick 12 to 15 photographs. Every person picks their own pick. They pick what they want. They write a first-person narrative. I simply ask them, write as if you inhabit this body. Write about this person, first person. All right. Everybody does that. Then they pair up with someone. They don't share their writing. Then they switch pictures, and they write as objectively as they can a description of what they see, and that's it. And they have some time to do that. Then they share, and they talk. They get to talk with each other for a while about that. So 2 pictures, 4 texts, they talk. And then we go back to the big group, and I'll just kind of pick and choose here because everything's written down. But we talk about things like, how's the experience of writing the first one versus the experience of writing the second one? What happened to the tone? Can you relate this to your experience, your personal experience so far in medical school or in life? They're really new in medical school, right? How do you think the experience of putting yourself in someone's shoes is different from observing them? And what relevance do you see to the clinical setting? Should I stop? Yep. Okay, so the last activity is this picture, and it's a multiple perspective writing activity. It's very completely described in the handout. Sorry, gotta be a team player. I want Joel to keep working with me.
Oh, working with Ruth is great. Working with Ruth is great, but how about us? How about the half of us that teach medical students, that practice medicine? How we doing? Turns out if you ask our patients if we're empathic, if we listen to them, if we care about what's happening to them and their families, if we ask our doctors, how you doing? I'm pretty good. I'm doing fine. How about you? Doing okay? All right. You ask our patients, the results are, depending upon your perspective, somewhere between bad and god-awful. And so the question is, what can we do about that as educators? And we can lecture to them about how you need to be more empathic, you need to listen better, but maybe the arts can help teach us. And that's what got us going with the medical arts program. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about some practical lessons we've learned through that program, which is related to but distinct from what Ruth was describing. And I'm going to think back to the trainees that I mentioned earlier this morning who, we heard that 99% of them were sitting in front of a computer this morning, and about 99% of them are sitting in front of a computer this afternoon too. And how can we help them to be more empathic? And along with empathy comes other non-structural functions of medicine. Ambiguity. I mean, we select medical students because they're really, really, really good at taking multiple choice questions and getting them all right and doing their science experiments well. And in the first years of medical school, we expect them to learn the difference between interleukins 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not even sure there are 4 interleukins, but there probably are. And then we throw them on the wards. And then we have them take care of real, honest-to-God human beings. And guess what? It's ambiguous. And some of them freak out. They can't deal with it. And those people, I'm not going to insult certain specialties by suggesting that. But we want to teach them to revel in ambiguity, to love ambiguity, to embrace ambiguity. And art is a way of doing that. I mean, what do these images mean? Well, there's not a right answer, and somebody said that earlier this morning. There are many right answers. We want them to love the concept of ambiguity. We want to embrace cultural differences. It matters who you are. Everybody is not the same. We want them to learn to appreciate the life course and take care of people who are in pain, people who are dying. And the art is a good way of doing that. We've started the medical arts program about 8 years ago, in which we use art to try to accomplish these goals. We have 8 to 10 sessions a year. There's some kind of an artistic event followed by a dinner where we sit and discuss what goes on. So a few lessons that we've learned from that. One is the importance of having diverse interests. The three leaders of this group are myself, Sanjay Saint, and Jim Stanley. We're very different. We have different ideas. We like different things. We want to do different things. You know, I really think when you have a team, if everybody thinks the same, then you're not going to get as far as if you have people who have different styles. Another important thing is, and I'm going to talk a little more about the clinical relevance. I think that sometimes it helps. It's not essential, but it helps to have somebody who is clinically active and highly respected clinically who can say, this is relevant because of this reason. Why should you care? I mean, medical students are they're very sensitive sometimes to whether or not you have a white coat on. And I refer to it metaphorically as putting the white coat on, which is something like when I say, well, last week when I was in clinic or yesterday when I was making rounds. And Sanjay and Jim Sanjay's the chief of medicine at the VA. Jim's a vascular surgeon. It's also important to have expertise. And that's the other half of the people here. And it's people like Ruth. So that when you do this, you've got somebody with you who really knows what's going on, who's not just, I mean, I can blather on about paintings pretty well. But I don't really understand. I mean, Ruth knows what's going on, and students pick up on that, and that's really important. We've had some wonderful experiences with Ruth. Other things I'll just tag briefly as the kinds of things we've looked at that haven't been mentioned. A lot has already been mentioned. Understanding different cultures. Cultural competency is all the norm. I have no idea what that phrase means. I mean, does that mean you're competent in a variety of different cultures? That's meaningless if you think about it. But I think it's important to think about the fact that human beings are different. And so, for example, we have toured African art. We have toured Chinese art. And these have sparked wonderful discussions amongst the trainees about what difference does it make if you're Chinese, right? What if you're a Chinese American practicing medicine? Should that matter? Does that matter? And art is a way of unpacking these kinds of difficult to discuss issues, which are also in the national political news these days. We've tried as much as possible in some of our, and I'm going to edge briefly and just mention, but I'll leave the non-visual arts quickly. We also bring in artists in other forms. We have musicians in. We like to have the musicians come and make rounds. We meet with them. Andras Schiff, for example, performed, and we had lunch with him. We've had musicians that have come on rounds and then came and talked with us about what music has to do with medicine from what they've seen. We've even had one artist who came back, Rob Drummond, a Scottish playwright, came and talked to the students, and he has now come back for a 2-week residency for a new play that's been commissioned by the Royal Court Theatre in London. So when possible, we try to have the artists and the clinicians interact and work together. And it's the same thing with the curators in the art museum. We work with the MFA program. Somebody talked about artists and bodies. Well, people who write. We have a wonderful MFA program at the University of Michigan. Turns out they write about sickness, and they write about death, and they write about health. And the opportunity to put together young people who are studying how to write and young people who are studying how to take care of sick people and give them the opportunity to read their writings to each other and to interact, and they love it. They absolutely love it. And that's a big part of what we've been doing. A few other just comments and reactions, practical ones, in terms of different levels of teaching that's been mentioned. I understand why we all teach M1s. I mean, Ruth talked about a session we did with M1s. Timing is much easier. I am not so sure that a course for an M1, when she has then completed her medical school and her residency and her fellowship, and 12 years down the road is going into practice in neurosurgery, that the experience she had 12 years ago is going to be that meaningful to her practice of medicine, and that is what we want to impact. So I think it's, to the extent possible, if we can spread these experiences out, and some people are doing that in terms of the residencies. We do this operationally in our program. We have assigned seatings at the dinners, and we spread people out. And we find that the chief resident in the M1, often the chief residents enjoy rethinking what it was like to be an M1 as a first-year medical student. And the first-year medical students conversely learn from the chief residents. So mixing them up we find really, really useful. One of the big problems, of course, is timing. People are busy. Again, M1s, it's easier to say we're going to have something at a specific time. Residents, they're doing night shifts, they're in the emergency department, they're on vacation, it's oftentimes difficult. And, people call and say, I was planning on coming to your program, but, we're running late in the OR, and so I'm not going to be there. And that happens. A comment about timing and empathy that was prompted by something somebody said this morning, that it's, 10 to 17 seconds you stand in front of a painting? That's interesting because that's also roughly the amount of time that physicians will let you talk before interrupting you. You come into the doctor's office and they say, so, tell me, why are you here? And 15 seconds later, I interrupt you. So, I don't think I started it right. I think I didn't start right at 10 minutes. Give me just a second more. Anyway, timing, and this gets to the value of music. I know this is mainly visual arts, but I just want to put a plug in for music as well as an art form that forces you to play by that amount of time. The last thing I want to talk about very briefly, is challenges. We all face challenges. One of the big challenges is money. Who's going to pay for all this? Required versus elective courses. If we all believe, and I certainly do, that this is important and it's important for everybody, do I really want to drag some of our students who really think this is a stupid and worthless waste of time when they could be studying their biochemistry and force them to do something they really don't want to do? Well, yeah, I'd do it actually, but it poses challenges. And lastly, our peerless leaders. I have been asked, what is the ROI on art? By a senior leader of our medical school. We need to do better research. We need to do research that moves beyond showing that a self-selected group of people, when asked if given the opportunity to do something that they want to do, find it valuable. I believe deeply that that's true, but I'd like to see some other data. I'd like to see data that links with the outcomes we're looking at. On the other hand, why? Quick quiz for all the physicians in the room. How many of you could write the Krebs cycle out right now? How many of you once knew the Krebs cycle? How many of you take care of patients with diabetes? All right. So either you're incompetent at taking care of patients with diabetes, which I know some of you, I suspect you're not all incompetent, or where's the proof that learning the Krebs cycle makes you a better doctor? And if you want proof that the arts make you a better doctor, why do you then not demand the same proof for things like the Krebs cycle? So I wonder if we should even try to create that kind of evidence. I'm serious. I'm really serious.
I am so glad that we let you go over your time a little bit, because that's something I've heard brought up at various in various venues over the years, and I think it's a great question to both bring to the breakout on research and evaluation, to the plenary session on research and evaluation, and then tomorrow the sessions that happen back here at MoMA. There are no presenters, just Bonnie and Wendy and me facilitating the conversation with you, and we'd like to, kind of see which of these pressing topics bubble up the most. Ray, you were an excellent moderator and have kept us right on time. Just a couple notes. We'll put up the slide that shows where the breakouts are happening. You have a 15-minute break before them. If you are presenting in the 3 o'clock slot, please go in about 5 minutes to your room and we'll just check in. We'll have a timekeeper, of course, in every room, and someone who can help you with the AV if necessary. And then there'll be a break between the two sessions. If you are presenting in the second session, please go there early. All right, thanks. The rooms are right out when you're in the reception space. Classroom A is at the bottom of the stairs, B is in the middle, and C is towards the elevator, and this is the theater.
Much more to say.
doctor better because of it. They're very, very hard.
No kidding. Oh, how great. Oh, terrific. Oh, wow. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, it is the center of the universe, isn't it? Yeah, I know. Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, terrific. Oh, terrific. Okay. Great. 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 Till Friday morning? Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
We have all day tomorrow here, so it's, we don't really have we haven't made much time outside. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm Carolyn. Oh, Carolyn. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yes. Oh, is that right? Oh, is that right? What's that? Say your name again. I recognize the name, but don't know by the number. Wow. a 19th century name, and it kind of is who I am.
I know, people say, oh, I know how glad to be
Exactly.
Because the, yeah, there were always two or three Sues.
Sue's in the class, exactly.
So you had to be Sue C, you were probably Sue D.
Exactly, yes, because I have the longest name there, but,
Yeah.
so. Yes, and this is Stephanie.
Oh.
my colleague. Thank you. Okay, and are you going to be doing it midway or finally just at the end?
He's really speaking for the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, if you could give me
Yeah,
a
sure.
2-minute run.
I'm
first.
Share a couple educators.
She's doing all the background and I'm doing the art
Taking over
stuff.
on the demo portion of the conference.
No, I'd rather it was 2 minutes for
Or
me and
it's
so we
3,
can spend
4.
more on the art. We'll just thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will.
I wonder if I can invite everybody to
Absolutely. Much nicer. Oh, hi. I'm Stephanie Brown Clark. Nice to meet you. And I'm Susan Davis. Hi there.
Okay, sure.
Sounds great. Okay, I'll just not to worry.
We're gonna change seats also.
That's great. Something like that, yes. Yes, I think that's the order. We're in the middle.
Yes, gorgeous.
We're gonna flash by it, so I'm glad you could see it.
Yeah.
We're gonna stand together. Yes, we will stand together.
I'm not gonna introduce, it's not logistically impossible. Okay. Yeah. Is it time to start? Okay. Okay. I'm a low top. Can everybody hear me? Do I even need this? Yeah, but you can hear me? That was a qualified yes, I heard from you, Gretchen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peggy Birchnell. I am the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And I've been asked to moderate this panel, which means, I think, really to introduce these wonderful colleagues. I know we have all heard a lot already. My head is spinning. But I think now this is an opportunity, I think, to really get down and into some of the meat of these programs. So we have 3 groups here, 3 pairs of educators, both medical and museum. At the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the Ackland Art Museum works with faculty in the schools of medicine, nursing, public health, et cetera, I have here Carolyn Almendinger, who is the Director of Academic Programs at the museum. And interestingly for her, she described herself as a verbal and mathematical thinker. So maybe this is why she gets along with the medical folks. Susan Coppola is Professor of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at UNC Chapel Hill, with a specialization in older adults. And she has incorporated humanities in courses on biomedical and phenomenological perspectives on illness and disability since 1998. I've always wanted to use the word phenomenological. Wasn't it great? Did that just make us all feel really smart? So I think it's interesting to think more about that. Also, we have the University of Rochester. The Art and Observation Program is a joint effort between the Memorial Art Gallery and the Division of Medical Humanities and Bioethics in the School of Medicine and Dentistry. They have worked together since 2002 to offer workshops focused on observation and reflection, team learning, cultural sensitivity, and clinical reasoning. So they're not sitting in the right order, but Susan Dodge Peters Dace, have I got Dace? Is Senior Associate at the Memorial Art Gallery. And her work reflects her dual passions with degrees in art history and divinity, especially in chaplaincy. Is that a word? That's not a word I knew, but that's an excellent word. And she is joined by Stephanie Brown Clark, the director of the Division of Medical Humanities and Bioethics at the University of Rochester School of Medicine, who also directs the new master's program in medical humanities there. Stephanie has a master's in English literature as well as her MD, and then a PhD in medical history and literature. Yeah, so wow, that she brings a lot to this effort. And she teaches, obviously, courses in medical history and literature related to contemporary medical topics. And interestingly, she has a connection with our next group from Providence, the RISD Museum and Brown University, because you have a child who just graduated from
Yeah, Zoe, she's sitting there.
Oh, that's exciting. Graduated from RISD. Oh, future artist, we hope? Yeah, fantastic. So from RISD, we'll hear about the partnership that has evolved there with medical students. We have Jay Baruch, who's the Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at Brown. He is, and as well as being an emergency doctor, he writes and is interested in interdisciplinary partnerships. And at the very end is Jackie Delamaitre, the museum educator for almost 15 years. She's back home here. She started here, worked at the Whitney and the Guggenheim. She's now with us up in New England. We love having her as a colleague at RISD. And she also has a hidden talent as a fiction writer. So we have a multi-talented group here in many different ways. So to get us started, let's hear from you.
I don't know if I know how to work the.
Laurel's going to help you.
Okay, great. It's probably not so complicated. It's probably a. Forward, reverse, and, okay. All right, terrific. Okay, let's see if I can try this. Great. Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Elmeninger. This is Sue Coppola, as you know. And what we are here to discuss today is a project that is an arts-based module, as you can tell, embedded in a course that Sue teaches in the Occupational Therapy Master's Program. That's a required course for students in that program that builds on some work that Sue has always done, incorporating arts into her occupational therapy, occupational science curriculum, adding the art museum to the mix. It is also the subject of a research study that we completed a couple of years ago and are in the process of writing up for publication, together with two other colleagues, a PhD student in occupational science, and a methodologist. That's right. Also in Sue's area of the university. This is a project that is based on a strong interest in the power of the visual arts to support learning and teaching in every discipline across the university. I have imperialistic ambitions for the university, and occupational therapy, occupational sciences in it. But it also builds on not only Sue's teaching, but also research interests that she has held for a long time. And I think our next slide is a way to talk a little bit about that.
So probably most of you here have heard of John Dewey or have been educated with him in the background of the minds of the people who are teaching. Some key pieces of John Dewey's pedagogy are the importance of context and sequence of material, social processes as being a very important part of learning, an inquiry process that is very deliberate and deliberative and creative, and also active experiences. And this is something that I think is very important for us to bring to our processes when we think about bringing, say, meta students into an art museum. What are our beliefs about what's really happening there? So this has been really fun for me to think about the work of John Dewey, his original writings, and consider that also that is part of what occupational therapy was built upon. OT began in the arts and crafts era, and during the moral treatment era, and big emphasis on pragmatism, on human rights, and as a matter of justice, that people all be able to participate in what matters to them, and a belief in occupational therapy that learning happens through doing. And so we developed this module, keeping those things in mind, knowing that it was a parallel process, that students were learning how to be occupational therapists and employ these things with their clients to enable them to do what matters in their life, while at the same time, the students were learning how to be occupational therapists. And so then we took those philosophies and put it into a 3-part module, a museum with experience with the art museum that Carolyn's going to talk about, and then 2 art-making experiences with artists who have disabilities.
And those 2 art-making experiences, I would just add, are components that when Sue and I began working together, those were already part of her teaching process and incorporated into the courses that she taught. So we were adding in the art museum component and seeking to make it dovetail nicely with the other existing experiences. One of the things that I learned quickly in my work with Sue is that occupational therapy students, more than any other students in any other discipline outside art history and studio art, understand pictorial composition. This is something that was so striking to me that I talked with Sue about it, and she suggested, well, that may very well be part of the discipline, part of the responsibility of occupational therapy practice, in which OTs must be able to understand clients and their environment, and understand not just the person, but sort of how they're going to live, how they're going to get around and do the things that they need to do in the space around them. So in designing a museum experience for them, I chose works of art in the Acklands collection that, first of all, a group of 20 people could easily organize themselves around. Everyone could see something that would lend themselves in interesting ways to multiple points of view, all of these kinds of things that we've been hearing about. But in the case of this painting here, things that were readily accessible, somebody at a real beginner, anyone nervous about working with art, could say, oh, I recognize windows and people, but also more nuanced kinds of things, like patterns of light reflections. I don't know the specific name of that area of a church or church furniture, things like that, things that we could sort of build on and have a more extended discussion about. And one in which three-dimensional illusionistic space is something that the OT students would understand and feel interested in and able to talk about. They also were able, better than any other group of people that I'd worked with, able to deal with abstract expressionist painting. After an initial comment where a student said, "This looks chaotic," they began immediately to notice the order and to notice how the painting was put together, much more than any other students possible. So that was sort of the component, the basis of the art museum component. It added on to this is just a composite of images you want to say just a moment about Al's work?
Yeah, so this is a woman with MS and depression who uses art therapeutically in her day-to-day life. And so they were immersed in the whole experience of a therapeutic occupation involving art and learned a lot from that.
And the other one is this one.
A woman with bipolar disorder who uses making mandalas every day as a self-help thing for her, because she can assess her state every morning and know how to go about her day based on what comes out in the mandala.
And then finally, in our final seconds, this is sort of what happens next, what happens after sort of taken you through the first sort of sections, and we looked at student outcomes, asked them to reflect on their experiences. And this chart talks about some of the major categories that art makes different kinds of learning accessible to them, accessible to clients. Art, observation, awareness, and perspective, those kinds of themes, and that it was an out-of-the-box kind of thinking that helped them bridge the biomedical and the phenomenological arenas.
So we don't have the lines yet that go to what we really hope for in the outcome, and that students will have habits of inquiry so that they will be self-aware, take different perspectives, observe well and have an imagination, and then have some more art-informed interventions, things they actually do that are therapeutic occupations in people's lives. We haven't been able to make that bridge, but we do believe firmly that if we teach inquiry, it's going to be more important than those knowledge like the Krebs cycle.
That's right.
Great, thank you. Fantastic. And we're now going to turn it over to our friends from Rochester.
Sure.
A little bit of an obstacle course back here, speaking of OT.
And is it just the green button forward?
Yes.
Okay. So we wanted to talk to you about our program at the University of Rochester. This is a partnership that began in 2002. I had read the Dolev-Braverman letter in JAMA in the medical world.
And I'd read it in the New York Times.
And so I called. Connections are as simple as a phone call. So I called the Memorial Art Gallery and I said, is there someone that I could speak to? And that person was Susan, and we have been teaching. Initially, we started with observation. I think for most of us here, observation is really a shorthand. I think what we're all doing is beyond observation in many ways in terms of the skills that we're trying to teach. So I'm the director of the Division of Medical Humanities and Bioethics. So we have required courses for medical students, nursing students, sometimes those two groups together. We're working on that, as well as we have reached out to undergraduates, so pre-health and pre-med students at the University of Rochester College, and we have created a grad program in medical humanities.
I think one of the things that we wanted just to stress is not only that we really reach 500 people annually within our region. And these are single 2.5-hour sessions, but it's become a culture of the region in the healthcare between medicine, nursing, and the allied medical fields.
So we offer to date, we have what we call single sessions. These are 2-hour sessions for this large number of students, and we have people who do it once, repeat it. So we have people, programs that we've worked with for years. We have a couple of required courses for our single sessions for our medical students. We have offered and continue to offer 8-week electives for our medical students in year 1 and year 2. And we have recently created a 14-week course in visual arts and healthcare as part of our graduate and undergraduate offerings. One of the things that we do, the art stays the same. We have a beautiful collection at the Memorial Art Gallery, and what we do pedagogically is we have, as you can see, a diverse audience. So we meet with the teachers before the audience comes, and we ask them to identify learning objectives. And this is a sample of the kinds of skills that they are hoping that we can build by bringing them to the art gallery. So you can see there's the observation skills, the difference between collecting the data and interpreting it, the relationships, the parallels between doing an assessment of an art object and doing an assessment of a patient, self-reflection on assumptions and biases, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to problem solve and work in a team around artworks.
So knowing that you will all get all of these slides posted later, just to show you the protocol that we've developed, it's not VTS, it is a guided inquiry program that has actually been reinforced by chaplaincy training, which I have had. And these are the premises that I think are familiar to all of you. So, because this is a partnership between a medical school and an art museum, just a glimpse at some of the images that we use. This is a favorite, which is an image used in introductory sessions, which of course underlines the human condition and a relationship, gender issues, socioeconomic issues. That shirt that is interestingly rumpled, thank you, I was searching for a word. And how long is that ash? So those are the kinds of introductory questions that we use in our 2.5-hour sessions. Or this, one of the required programs for the University of Rochester, and this is MS4, the fourth-year students, is an intensive course in community health. And this image I use teaching them, which is about insider-outsider status. If you're going to be working with a community and only dipping in, there are defining stories in communities that you may not know if you are an outsider, and it takes a while to know. And so the story of Judith with the head of Holofernes, which may be familiar to many of you, depends on whether you're an insider or an outsider, whether it's heroic or horrific. And there's quite a conversation that ensues. Or this. In the Visual Arts and Healthcare, which is a survey of the visual arts and how the human body is represented, this image, which I tour the collection, which is an encyclopedic collection, but looking at bodies with an anatomy professor. And one of the things I now know, thanks to him, is that the left scrotum descends first and is thus, he could tell immediately, a little lower than the right. But the conversation that also ensued after this is all of the assumed challenges to, why is the penis missing? Was this an act of aggression, or is this what happens to a 2,000-year-old work of art? So, wonderful area for conversation. Or this, which is, once again, the image on the left and the image on the right, a Rodin, which we use in Stephanie's History of the Body.
And we have joining us when we do this particular art gallery visit is someone who teaches disability studies, so looking at the fragmented body or the difference between a torso in art as beautiful and someone without limbs as something that has a different cultural tenor.
Or this, in partnership with the George Eastman Museum, which is in town. For example, we look at a series by Nick Nixon from the mid-late 80s from people with AIDS, and all of the assumptions of these images, which the assumptions are the pathos of it, when in fact it is a complicated story that is being told here. Who's not there? The individual's wife. And this is not an individual who acquired AIDS through his sexual activity, which is the assumption. We're always challenging assumptions. But he is an individual with hemophilia. So the last image that we will show you is that it works both ways. We, in partnership from the museum, are now working more closely in our outreach programs, our equivalent to Meet Me at MoMA, with individuals with dementia, and also visiting individuals with works of art as a means of connecting directly in the hospital or in a residential care facility. So, thank you so much.
I love that comment that connections are as easy as a phone call. I think that sometimes we're not sure that that's the case, but I think it's great to know that it works. Yeah. So now Jay and Jackie will talk about their programs between RISD and Brown. Are you all set?
Hey, my name is Jay Baruch, and it's a real honor to be here. I'm going to start. We're going to start with a story, and it's an ER story. An intoxicated woman comes to the ER after falling on an outstretched hand. We diagnose a wrist fracture, align the bones, splint the arm, treat the pain, and arrange follow-up. She returns a few nights later, this time severely beaten, the result of domestic violence. What did we miss the first time? How and why? This case highlights the complicated and precarious nature of medical decision-making. It totally is, in today's discussion, we'll discuss how engaging with art objects illuminates our minds at work, reveals our vulnerabilities and pitfalls in thinking that can result in catastrophic consequences when caring for patients. When I'm taking care of patients, my initial impulse feels a lot like stepping before this Twombly. Where do you begin? What my eyes might consider a safe landing place might be very different than yours. The student's first impulse is to find something recognizable. Are those hearts sort of, or maybe are those butterflies soaring off the canvas? They try to make sense of it, as if it's a pirate's map, and somewhere there's an X with a secret treasure. We use this painting frequently in our teaching. It was first used with first-year medical students, and by we, I mean a collaboration between Alfred Medical School and the RISD School of Design that included myself, Kevin Louis, who was a medical student and now a resident at Mount Sinai, Hollis Mickey and Sarah Gans from the RISD Museum, and now Jackie. The museum educators guide the students with questions or tasks. For example, select one small area of the painting and sketch the positive space, the area with marks or information. Then sketch the negative space, the spaces around the marks, supposedly without information. And what students soon discover is that the negative space is always relational, is in reference to something, and they learn how marks in their absence can communicate ideas. Students are then asked to make an abstract drawing of a conversation, an important conversation they had, capturing what they thought was the positive space in the conversation and the negative space. We then make connections back to what is unsaid or unsayable in medicine, and the students soon learn that where we set our eyes and what we value as relevant information are decisions we make even before we think we're making decisions. That session actually took place over a couple of hours, and it's impossible to go into great detail over a couple of minutes. We wanted to offer a glimpse into the type of work that's being done between our two institutions. We began this collaboration 6 years ago, and the collaboration basically, at that time, we wanted to sort of depart from what was being done in the projects being done in the medical literature, which was a lot of times focused on reflection and empathy and observation skills and pattern recognition, which was all terrific stuff, but it wasn't what we were interested in. We wanted to focus more on creativity, and we wanted students to become aware of how their mind, become aware of their mind at work, and to make them more comfortable with mystery and uncertainty. And we wanted them to become be cognizant of the creative dimensions of medical decision-making. So basically, we used the museum as objects as complex bodies of information. Like patients, they elicit strong emotions, can forge powerful connections, as well as appear inscrutable, overwhelming, and yes, unappealing. Sarah and Hollis introduced and modeled an exercise called description, deduction, and speculation based on the work of Jules Brown, a professor at Yale, which I will not go into detail with the group that's here. But what the purpose of it was having the students go through that process was them to sort of be aware of the assumptions that they jumped to, and that oftentimes what they thought was perhaps when they saw a 2 adults and 2 young kids they thought was a family, that wasn't necessarily a family. They were making a deduction before they were based on assumptions. And what we wanted to do was make them aware of how this type of thinking can compromise and creep into the medical sphere as well. And that patients with, for example, patients with chronic dental pain can oftentimes be assumed to be a drug seeker, or an intoxicated woman with a broken wrist fell because she was drunk. By helping students slow down and taking the full picture, we wanted them to learn to sort of how to take in the full picture and to think about how they're thinking. What we also did was we had students actually document and their thinking process. This is after the whole process was done, and it was very interesting for them to actually think about and try to communicate how they were thinking through the process themselves. The last thing I was going to go into is we actually used this sarcophagus in another exercise we did, which we had some students sort of looked at areas where they had questions, certain areas where they had answers, and other areas where they sort of wanted to know more information. And this project was basically on how they tell stories and how they sort of create narratives, and how other people will develop different narratives based on similar information. Over time, we've done undergraduate work. This piece came out in academic medicine, focused on creativity. We've presented at medical meetings. This is with an emergency medicine resident who's now doing a palliative care fellowship at Hopkins. This is an undergraduate class that I taught with Hollis called The Creative Dimensions of Medical Decision Making, that actually took place at the RISD Museum. And this is a CME program with Jane Hesser, who is doing incredible work. Jackie?
Great, yeah, and I just want to come in with a bit of a museum educator's perspective on all of this, and the parts that we have found very salient and significant. One is something that Jay has been talking about, but the metacognitive aspect. Trying to help students and residents and physicians be aware of their own thinking process. And for example, something like how their personal experience influences their interpretations, or in the medical world, their diagnoses, and developing that awareness of that thinking. And another major salient point for us has been reflection, which has come up a lot today, but that we don't want to make those connections for the people we're working with, for the physicians, for the students. We want them to make those connections for themselves. Not there for 2 reasons. One, we can't presume to know, as museum educators facilitating some of these sessions, what it is like as a physician, what connections they might want to make, but also that a participant gains so much more from making those connections on their own. So, like people have talked about, always building that time in for them to be making their own reflections and to be bringing that to the group and to be coming to those connections together. And then I'll just leave with a couple questions that we definitely have that come up often, session after session. One is the aspect of time. At RISD, we have been doing many sessions that has been based on one of the programs in the museum called Ways of Looking, in which we spend 1 hour at one object, which in all my years as a museum educator before I got to RISD, I had never done and was quite afraid of, but it has been amazing, and it's amazing for every group. I was thinking when Alexandra Horowitz was talking about how I can go to the same artwork with different groups, and it's like taking a different walk guided by these groups into that artwork. So that aspect of time for us, we have this luxurious amount of time, but then when we talk to our groups, the physicians, when we talk to the detectives we've worked with, they don't have that time. And then the very last question is transfer, and we call it the holy grail of research. I met Peggy when we were first doing research on how students can transfer critical thinking skills from looking at art to literacy. That is my question for these partnerships. How do we transfer the looking and thinking skills from the galleries into doctors' offices and hospitals?
Great, thank you.
And we just want to thank our various colleagues for their great work, because we're just a small part of a bunch of people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, This is great because we do finally have some time for questions. And whether we want to start with some of the questions that Jackie posed about how much time does it take, how do we know it's happening, transferring, or whether there are questions out there that you all have. I just throw it open to you right now. We've got this amazing wealth of expertise here, so let's have at it. Yeah.
I may have a too pedestrian question. This is actually a leftover from the morning, but I noticed a number of people referring to visual thinking strategies. And as a person from the physician side, this is a foreign idea, concept, program. And so if someone could sketch that for all of us who are not in the know, that would be helpful.
Who wants to take a, shall I? Yes. Yeah. So the visual thinking strategy, sometimes shorthanded to VTS, is a teaching philosophy and an approach that was developed by Abigail Housen, who's a cognitive psychologist, and Philip Yenewan, who was the head of education here at the Museum of Modern Art. It's based on a theory of how people learn how to look at art. And the program itself is a curriculum that is designed to help non-art people. In this case, it was specifically designed for classroom teachers, K-12 classroom teachers, but designed to give people basically a thinking routine to use to engage in a conversation. What you end up with is a facilitated conversation where the teacher is someone who paraphrases what the group is saying, helps link thoughts, and with the essential goal of making people feel confident in their own skills to look at and make meaning from works of art. Does that suffice?
Is this a big deal in the art world?
It's a technique that is used across the world, really, in various museums. I would say many museums use it as part of their toolkit. Some people use it almost exclusively. It kind of depends, but it's certainly out there in the museum world.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
It's kind of a big question. What have the health professional side learned from working with the museum educators about teaching, and vice versa? What have the museum educators learned from the health professionals about teaching? Is question number one. And question number two is, how has this affected your institutions? How is in having this type of teaching within your, how has it affected the larger institutions?
That's a great question.
Well, let me start. I know, Jay. Can you hear me okay? Well, I am an MD with, I'm a text person, as you could imagine. So I will tell you that personally and professionally, what I came to realize in medicine, it's an apprenticeship model. So we learn observation by practicing it over and over without a pedagogy. So for somebody who, I go to art museums, but to know about art education, I would say for me personally, and I think all of the clinicians that have been engaged with the Memorial Art Gallery on this project over the years, realize that there are people who know more than they have the expertise, really, in thinking and the pedagogies of how people look and how people see. So for the clinical faculty, this was an education, that it was, and the hope is this notion it takes you 10 years to be a good clinician. If we could somehow provide the toolkits using the expertise that is outside of medicine. Doctors are really good, healthcare professionals are good at healthcare professions. But in terms of the world of art, I think what we have learned at our institution, and I can't speak for the rest of you, is that we need to partner because there's a world of expertise. It's certainly changed the way that that the clinicians and the medical students think about the way they think about a patient. we tried to develop a kind of a toolkit of how you look at an artwork. You can translate it to how you look at a patient, how you think about their story and try to come up with a story that could be the wrong story, that could be one of 100 stories, so there's lots of ambiguity and uncertainty. To have it unpacked, which is really, it came through art education. They saw, is this what we do when we're doing decision-making and clinical reasoning? So I'm speaking as a clinician, that's what I can say, that's what the faculty that teaches this has learned, at least in the medical school, and also what our students are learning.
I'll share some very simple, concrete things, because I actually gave a talk at our medical school about why medical educators need to be part of medical education. And concrete skills, even the most excited people when they come to the museum for one of our programs, and they're from either undergrads to people out there, some people, they're a little cynical, right? They're there, but they're also a little bit skeptical. And I have never seen a bunch of people like art educators who were able to win over a group, who are somewhat suspicious or like saying, listen, come on, give me your best. And they've won them over. And they won them over in a couple of ways. I think one is art educators are so comfortable with silence. And I think students, that's something that I think physicians and students can learn, which is like, you don't have to fill the space. They sometimes just like let people have time. They're very comfortable with what they do. And I love the fact that they're very comfortable with silence. With us, what I think with our collaboration has been so successful is that a lot of the art educators are also artists. And so we're very comfortable with sort of taking risks and sort of pushing the envelope and trying to change things and trying to willing to experiment and being willing to fail. And we're very comfortable with sort of taking some risk pedagogically. And we're sort of modeling the very things that we were hoping that our students are going to get out of the programs themselves.
So I didn't get the opportunity to compliment Carolyn enough as we stood up there, because I have learned so much from her, and the relationship built across disciplines has been very powerful for me in multiple ways. And I think that basically I am a student, just like we think of our students. We want them to develop a clear understanding of the difference between observation and inference. We want them to think about context in very complex ways, temporal context, perspectives, and so on. So basically, I just need to learn all the things that we're hoping the students can learn. Why be a hypocrite about that? And then the same processes of just slowing down and allowing for silence, time, for things. What I found in healthcare education in general across the disciplines is that we have this arrogance that just because we know how to practice, we know how to teach, and we don't. And that happens, I think that's one of the big problems of so many of our education programs in healthcare. We just think, oh, well, I know how to do it, I know how to tell it. And I've learned a lot about how to teach, and I carefully observe Carolyn when she's leading a group of my students through a guided inquiry. And it's really so informative. I feel like it's like a really good education session for me, so that I know how to guide the students through their thinking. So again, it's just the same for me as it is for students.
Great. It's that idea of being a learner, constantly learning is the way we all learn. I'm just curious for the museum educators to, I think it's I'm pretty sure it's a two-way street.
Oh. Maybe I could speak. I know that in this morning, people were saying the museum is not a matter of life and death. The stakes are ultimately high in the healthcare world, especially if you're working, Jay, as you do, in an emergency room. And so how to actually focus our contributions. One of them is, yes, slowing down. I have also been challenged about we don't have the time. So if we who do have the time can actually explore a safe space, and in that safe space, which is a museum with works of art, which we've talked about beheadings in the presence of the painting that I've used, and not, God forbid, domestic violence using that, but international images. it is a place where we can, people from both sides of the aisle, to use another metaphor, build habits of mind and collaboration. And it takes place in a safe space. So actually working side by side with physicians, and I have as a hospital chaplain, the respect works profoundly both ways. So skills and respect.
I just wanted to say, this is picking up on threads of things that have come up in other sessions as well, and I'm thinking at the moment about Ray Williams talking about the responsibility to colleagues in medicine and in health fields of, let me make sure this is relevant for you somehow, that the time that you're spending is relevant. I personally, professionally, love having the challenge that there are those kinds of stakes, that, okay, what I'm going to prepare, what we're going to do here, it has to be meaningful. It has to be, it has to be worth the time and the effort that people are doing. I'm responsible for making sure something comes out of this. I find that exhilarating, actually, and to have anyone in the group, and your students are pretty wonderful. They're not overtly skeptical, but I kind of love having skeptics in the in the group. I find it really kind of galvanizes and the conversation and makes it really interesting.
Yeah, Gretchen.
Can you guys talk a little bit about when programs, when students must take the classes versus when they can take them as an elective? Our program is fully elective, and they love it, and it's competitive, and they sign up really quickly. How does it work? What are the pros and cons for sort of doing it a different way? And I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. Talk about skeptics. I mean, that's where the skeptics would be for sure.
I'm thinking about a recent event that we did in connection with a medical school student group that was, still haven't quite figured out to what extent it's voluntary or there's peer pressure or there's some kind of, the turnout was really good for it, but it wasn't mandatory. But I think that one of the reasons for the good turnout is that we made sure that there were lots of refreshments and that it was the end of the day. I mean, that works with every population, of course. But that's my one, because for the most part, I work with students and faculty in the context of a course like the one with Sue, like my other colleague Mimi Chapman and others on campus, that they'll come in the context of a course. So it is more of a mandatory thing, but it is that within, it's a component. It's a single or a series of visits within the context of a visit. So that's what I'm most accustomed to.
I'd like to add to the point that students need to know what to expect. There are these control issues, particularly among med students, these different signature pedagogies. They expect different things. And I think the long-term relationships that you build, I think that to make it mandatory, it needs to be written on the website for the med school when people are applying, so that they say, oh yeah, you said you were going to do this, you kept your promise. But if they seem to not be keeping the promise if they spring things on them they didn't expect to be part of the curriculum. So I think it requires long-term visionary planning with leaders.
One more question, maybe there.
Yeah.
What?
She's got her hand up.
Okay.
Add maybe a little bit to someone who's new to VTS. VTS is actually based around 3 key questions, right? They're inquiry-based. I think that's sort of the key thing with VTS. What do you see? What makes you say that? What more can we find? So it's about inquiry-based. And the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot, fantastic, really inspiring. Thank you. I'm from Rochester, where Mayo is, and we're going to talk later, but this is really fantastic. But I was wondering if some of the panelists could talk a little bit about the bigger picture, which is
humanity.
In 2 minutes or less?
Yeah. But otherwise, we're making it really myopic rather than we're part of a change that's going on in the world. You know, I mean, the political situation is not to be underestimated.
I'll take a 3-hour stab at this. Okay? Put up your feet, everybody. We'll start. I think your question is an absolutely superb one because I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the challenges that healthcare is experiencing right now is actually demanding us to rethink how we educate future physicians. And if you think about it, like in the past when I went to medical school, it was a lot about sort of knowledge-based, right? And there's so much knowledge in our pockets, right? Our relationship with knowledge has changed, and yet medicine has become infinitely more complex. So, you know, we have to also think about how do you apply that knowledge? Because, you know, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you apply it wrong, if you have the narrative wrong, if your thinking is in error, you're going to make mistakes, right? And you're going to miss things, or you're going to be less caring. It's not just about mistakes, you know? And so I have an article coming out that basically says that I think the new healthcare team has to include, you know, humanities scholars, museum educators, designers. We have to actually redesign how we do medical education, and that's going to be a tough wall to crack. That really is. However, I think people feel, at least within medical education, I think there are going to be schools that are going to push the envelope. But you've hit it. It's not just about museums and about medical education. It's about a larger discussion, a larger argument about how we're going to, what we want our students to leave medical school with. And it's a profound one, and it's one that I think really gets invigorated by conversations with museum educators.
You have one comment?
Yeah, I just think that you can take that across the university. So you can take that through engineering, you can take it's like the liberal arts, and I've always said, you know, imagine going through life not knowing anything about literature or art or music or, you know, like who are these people and how will they live and what joy will they derive and how will they communicate? It's a huge issue in universities.
Well, that's what we're here for, to contemplate the big issues. But thank you for this. Let's thank this incredible panel.
Excellent question. No, Jane Trail. She's leading our medical humanities master's program at UNC. No, yeah.
By the way,
Is your program fairly new? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to know more.
Somebody who winds up working in a rehab OT in Burke, for example, in the outpatient department, how is this going to influence them? Because they are very certain best practice. That's why we're looking at. They also operate in a totally.
Jay works like 80 hours a week.
And how are they going to apply this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that.
How do you see them applying it?
I see them applying it by really understanding, like one thing, aesthetics in your everyday, that you think about the art of what clothes you choose to wear, not just, okay, put your sneakers on, tie it this way, but like having a bigger understanding of art in the people's lives that they're caring for. Everybody has the way that they're
all it is. There
That's it.
isn't a computer
No,
on
yeah,
there.
I think you can just hit forward and it'll go forward. Yes. It goes next and back when you set.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
I don't know anything. She would know more about that stuff.
Hi guys. I am Sheila. Hi, this is Courtney. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Second. Okay. Yes. You want to? So you guys will sit next to Heather. Okay. Well, are we? You guys all sit, right? Sure. Yeah. Okay. It's gonna be okay. And are we standing up at the podium? Yes. Okay. Stay a little later. Very good. Sheila. Anita. Oh, nice to meet you. Stay. We're Samajian. So you want to sit on this side? Yeah. Yes. And Julia put this with us. She's faculty. Why don't we have you sit there and I'll bring over an extra chair for you. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys are last, but you're at the end here.
Okay.
Yeah. Because people rebelled and sat differently.
Share around the table, so.
Once they get up, I'll go sit. Yeah, I'll just like go and sit at the end or something. Or maybe I'll just sit somewhere. No, I can sit in the front row. Sure. Okay, I haven't met him yet.
Yes, hi. Nice to meet you.
Got all those halls.
Perfect. I found people from Rome.
I saw.
That's good.
Has that
reinvigorativeness the clock up there? Where should we go? From there?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and see my mom.
But you can sometimes, I mean, faculty or assault teachers, you can get them to just adapt what they were teaching to a new teaching style.
I used to do that.
But even with the
With other people.
I was one for just a week. Not
Should we start?
Yeah.
Hi. Hello. I'm Sheila Nagshine. I'm a general internal medicine physician at UCLA. And I'm going to take a couple minutes to just give you a little anecdote and then introduce everybody. And then they'll present. And then we'll have questions at the end. Okay? So we'll be very efficient. So I just traveled away from California with a 1-year-old on an airplane. So I've learned to ignore all the dagger looks at everybody on the flight will just give you the worst looks ever because you have a 1-year-old baby. So we got to the hotel and I just wanted my key and I wanted to go up and go to bed, put him to bed. And everything with him takes about 10 times longer than just being alone. And he lunged across the counter and got really interested in the concierge, the gentleman behind the concierge, and literally wanted to like suck his face. So he went over, was touching his face and licking him, and the guy didn't say anything, he was just smiling. Then he would smile and they would feel his forehead up to him. It was funny if I wasn't exhausted. But one thing that it showed me is that the incredible curiosity that kids have. And it's something that we all innately have at the beginning, and somehow we kind of lose it along the way. He kind of wants to feel, smell, touch, hear, see everything, and he kind of figures everything out that way. And one of the things that I realize is that we're trying to do with art as a pedagogical tool is really to inspire that level of curiosity, help not only students and practicing physicians become better observers, but also kind of figure out the patient's story, figure out what's going on with this person. And I feel like that's what my son's doing constantly all the time. So we're going to go ahead and introduce you guys. The first group is going to be Annie Morse.
Assistant Director of the College and University Programs. She's all the way at the other end. She's at the Art Institute of Chicago. She describes herself as an adventurous traveler. We also have Dr. Jay Beal, Assistant Dean of Academic Development at Rush Medical College, who describes himself as an outsider on the inside, which I thought was interesting because on these programs that you're developing, you kind of need someone like that. So they're going to be speaking about their program and how it's targeting first-year medical students to improve their observation skills. The second group is Amanda Blake. Amanda Blake, Interim Director of Education at the Dallas Museum of Art, who has special talent in dog photography, which I think is fascinating. And Courtney Crothers, who's an art curator at UTI Southwestern Med Center, who actually has a very interesting gift of putting all the pieces together, which would be good if you were living in my household. And Dr. Heather Wickless, who's Assistant Professor of Dermatology at UT Southwestern Medical School. And her special gift is cleaning up, which I could also use in my household. Then our last group is Vita Litvak, Adult Program Manager at the Flesher Art Memorial, whose hidden talent is dancing. Pre-baby, I could join you in that. That's over now. Dr. Sal Mangione, who is Associate Professor of Medicine and Coordinator of Humanities Program at SKMC of Thomas Jefferson University. His special gift or perspective is looking at teaching as a work of art, which I think is a fabulous way to look at it. And all of the group, oh, and one more person who just joined us, sorry. Julia Clift, she's faculty at Flesher Art Memorial, and she's actually a practicing artist. She draws and paints. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the first group, Annie Morse and Dr. Jay Beal.
Yep, there we go. Wow. I made something technological work. That's a good start. My name is Jay Beal. I am a clinical psychologist by training and by practice, and that's what I mean by outsider on the inside. I've practiced in hospital settings my entire career. I know a lot about how hospitals work and a lot about illness because I work in what's called health psychology, which focused on the experience of having mostly chronic illnesses and recovering from those. So I understand a great deal about medicine broadly, but I am not a physician. I do not have a medical training background, so I get to take both perspectives and advocate for both of those roles or both of those perspectives. Also want to very quickly thank and acknowledge our collaborators in this course that we offer through Rush Medical College in association with Annie from the Art Institute. We also have two collaborators at Columbia College of Chicago in the Department of Dance and Movement Therapy, Susan Imus, and in the Department of Theater, Caroline Latta. So this course that we offer is a first-year elective. It is 18 sessions, 18 3-hour sessions offered over the course of the first year. So a lot of time, relatively spread out, so a lot of time for the students to do a small amount of outside work, but also just sort of absorb the experience and recognize, being mindful of what's happening in their medical training lives as they move throughout that very critical first year. We use modules in literature, visual arts, dance and movement therapy, and theater, and we look at observation and engagement, and we play with that a great deal. And this really, I went to a conference about 3 years ago, and we've been offering the course for 4 years now, and I went to a conference 3 years ago, having just completed the first year of the course, and felt very pleased with myself because I had kept myself relatively ignorant of this larger field and all of my potential colleagues out there, and was immediately humbled by all of the things that were going on so many other places that were so much ahead of where we were. But the upside of that sort of humiliation 3 years ago was recognizing that we built an experience for our students that really work for our institution and work with our collaborators in a way that we were really proud of. Oh, I did that transition thing that makes things happen too slowly. Yeah. So we do have these 4 different modules. And we start, my way of thinking about it, and Annie will step in and correct me with a different perspective, is that we begin with the written word and we end with the written word. And between those two experiences of literature at the beginning and theater at the end, we deal with a lot of nonverbal ways of experiencing things and of telling stories through visual arts and through dance and movement work. And in my mind, it's a nice flow and a nice experience. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
A little bit. I just want to emphasize that I have them for 4 weeks, and that is a tremendous gift to me because they've already developed a relationship with each other and with Jay and with the idea that supports this entire project. So when they come to the museum, they've actually been working in a museum classroom for the first 4 weeks of the class. They already have a little bit of an affinity for the place in which they're doing this work, which is outside of the clinical environment. And I picked to represent the visual arts this Peter Bloom, The Rock, which is a phenomenally effective work because it's full of immediately recognizable and familiar things in an unbelievably unfamiliar and arcane organization. So we have a lot of opportunity to discuss, as I think we've talked about, the observational opportunity to slow down, to look a long time, and to acknowledge each other's different interpretations, to point out things that perhaps they hadn't seen before, and to come to some conclusion about what this picture might represent to individuals and globally. When we have these works laid out one among each other, they don't seem to have as much to do with one another as you might imagine, but from the idea of metamorphosis coming to us from the classical tradition, we acknowledge the fact that we're working in a more or less Western environment and that the climate of the hospital and the clinic is outside of that tradition, but that we don't necessarily take that into consideration when we're dealing with human beings, with patients. So we have this figure of Xipe Totec, who's a fertility figure from ancient Mexico. People look at this work and say, what's going on? It looks as though this child has a mask on, and doesn't that sweater look like something Charlie Brown wore? It turns out to be the figure of a human being wearing the skin of another human being, which elicits in normal, I would say normal, or other than medical groups, a kind of a convulsive ew factor. But for the medical students, they're actively working on cadavers, and so they're much less anxious about this and much more interested. But even for them, even when they're doing gross anatomy, they're also human, and so they have a little shiver as well. When we start to think about the way in which this is an unbelievably positive element or an image, working towards this, of course, very slowly and incrementally, towards the idea of taking on the characteristics of someone who has sacrificed themselves for a culture, taking on, allowing the old to be broken away to allow the new growth and the new seed to burst out of its husk. Suddenly this becomes much more meaningful to them. I include the solitude of the soul because sometimes we have the students embody the sculpture, and this brings the physical into the museum in a way that we probably wouldn't have done 10 or 15 years ago, but that now is very much a part of our pedagogy. And their willingness to discuss how differently they address the work they've seen when they have taken on the gesture and taken on the physical embodiment of this connection that also suggests a kind of isolation is quite moving, I think. And then, again, we bring ourselves back to the text and the subtext of what is seen and then what is understood at a later date. This is not a slide that I would ever show in the confines of the Art Institute. I think I would be drummed out. But American Gothic by Grant Wood is one of the great war horses of museum education. And we think that everybody knows it because it's been so often copied and parodied. But what we're searching for when we work with this work is that many people don't know what this picture is. And the assumption that, of course, they know it is very much akin to the idea that physicians know so much more than the layperson knows about the body that they can easily lose track of the fact that it's arcane knowledge, that they really know what it is. Here's this wretched parody, but you have to know what that is too. we're going to skip over the way in which we address that body. This is a good way to just summarize and perhaps conclude with the art making, and I'll let Jay do that.
Yeah, we play within, I want to be respectful of everyone else's time, but we keep going back and forth to how much creation and art making and larger projects need to be a part of our work together, and have not arrived at a perfect solution, but I think there's a lot to play with there, and we keep changing things every year and getting feedback and playing with that. We are working on better and more precise evaluation of the students and also getting evaluation from the students. Our students continue to do very well and remain, I think, highly engaged both in mindful practice but also in keeping the humanities alive in their broader lives. And here are some plans we have for future directions, but do not have time for those. Thank you.
All right, so the class that we're going to talk about, it's a partnership between 3 institutions, the Dallas Museum of Art, the UT Southwestern Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History, and UT Southwestern. The goal of our class overall is to engage medical students in observing, analyzing, and communicating about works of art in order to develop their diagnostic skills. We focus on museum collections to explore ways of looking at art through various avenues that include close examination, description, empathy, and insights into the human condition. We have the format here. We do focus on first and second year medical students. There's a pretty large wait list this year, so I think it's a class that is popular at the school. This year we also experimented, it's the second year that we've had this course at the DMA with UT Southwestern and UTD. We really wanted to, in addition to the evaluations that we do, to document the course throughout the semester. So we have an Instagram account that we all uploaded to, and we encouraged the students to upload to as well. And if you're interested, it's called Art Docs. So Bonnie was very interested in Instagram, and through our evaluation, I think next year we're going to focus on a hashtag instead of the account. That was overwhelming to the students. We're going to focus today on one particular lesson that we taught the students. In addition to what we're going to talk about today, we also covered artists with disease, the science of conservation, empathy, and cultural influences. So overall, the students have interactive experiences with works of art and with one another in small collaborative group efforts.
So the lesson that we're going to be kind of giving you an overview of basically focuses on a very contemporary art collection. And the medical, in every class, we try and have a corollary and bring back the importance and how this relates to our practice as physicians. So in this session, we start with a set of medical images, trying to illustrate the importance of color, for instance, in the nail photos, how subtle differences in color can lead us to very different diagnoses. On the top, we see some red-blues of a subungual hematoma, a benign diagnosis, versus on the bottom, we see the blue, grays, and blacks extending onto the cuticle here of a subungual melanoma. The second set of photos that we go through are a set of hands. These are just a small sampling of some of the images that we go through. And at first, we ask the students to assess, by looking at their own hands, which of these hands they think demonstrates pathology. So they first identify, okay, I think this is the hand that's got the problem. So on the upper photograph, they correctly choose that the left hand, in our viewpoint, is the diseased hand because it's an anemic hand and it's more pale than the normal hand. And here on the bottom, the diseased hand is one demonstrating carotenemia, basically someone eating too much vitamin A and carrots and orange vegetables. So what we're trying to illustrate here is that sometimes when we are examining our own patients, it can sometimes be hard to detect pathology without placing one color next to another color can change the way that we perceive that color. And then here, we're looking at two different patients with the same diagnosis with different color skin. And we try and illustrate in this photo how when we see color through another color, it changes our perception of that color. And at the bottom, we just kind of have one of the quotes that the students have. So anyway, with that, I think we'll go into the art collection and how this ties into that.
So this was one of the, I didn't mention that many of the classes occur off-site from the DMA. The majority are at the DMA, but we go across the street to the Nasher Sculpture Garden, as well as we go to the warehouse, which is a private collection. For this lesson, we were able to go to the Clements Hospital at UT Southwestern. You'll hear more about the uniqueness of that space. But what we did after Heather spoke about her the pictures of the hands and the nails, we introduced students to color theorist and abstract painter Joseph Alpers, who's known for his approach to studying color, and he believed it to be the most relative medium in art. So in focusing on how he taught everyone to experience color, to learn about the interaction of color. For example, a large swatch of the same color in small form looks very different, or layering and different color combinations create the same color to look very different. Focusing on that a bit with the students, and then asking them, I don't know who this belongs to, but we talked about Coca-Cola and how that was a popular red, and asked the students to identify what is Coca-Cola red. Of course, they couldn't identify this. We gave them various Pantone color swatches. And then we gave them the opportunity to kind of play with different swatches and experiment with different color combinations before talking about specific works of art and how this might apply.
So the work that you see on the bottom of the screen is a painting by Ollie Sivonen, who was actually a student of Joseph Albers. And this painting is in the Clements University Hospital collection, so it's a wonderful example. Once we have looked at the skin comparisons in the education center, and we've done the Albers exercise, we can actually go out into the hospital and look at some specific examples that illustrate what we've learned, and again, tying it back to the clinical so that they will have that clear application. In this piece, you can see how the different colors, and it doesn't show up terribly well, but you have a single color background and then ovals in different shapes, or in the same shape, but in different colors. And it's a very simple painting, and yet there's quite a bit going on. And the biggest correlation to the Albers experiment we did is in noting how some ovals seem to recede and others tend to come out at you. They appear to be different sizes, even though they're the exact same size. They appear to be on the same axis. However, it's again very hard to see in this slide, but they're actually offset. So this is a fun example that we can show them after they have been able to play a little bit. And then in addition to tying in the clinical, in most of our sessions, we also talk about art for art's sake. And especially with a very contemporary collection, which is what we have at the Clements University Hospital, there's a lot of opportunity for breaking things down and kind of exploring significance and meaning. This actually shows, I think the Pantone, Amanda mentioned the Pantone swatches earlier. This is an example of where the students were asked to look at a piece, in this case a tapestry by Hildur Johnson, and then to go back and select the color from the Pantone chart that best corresponded in their minds to the red magenta that you see. And then as a group, they went back and kind of compared, and there were a lot of different responses, different colors based on what each person perceived. And then they were asked to kind of agree on a single color that really represented that. So it was a collaborative exercise, which we try to stress. As they go out and become specialists, they'll be collaborating. But also it was representing the different descriptions of color and how important that's going to be in their note-taking. And go ahead, sure.
In this, we also do, I know other people have mentioned about like initial impression versus close observation. And so with this particular work, from a distance, it looks almost like maybe it was done by an inkjet printer, and that's if you're looking at it from across the room. But once you approach it upon close examination, it's actually weaving. And so we demonstrate that with our students, and we tie in that when you first walk into the room of a patient, you have an initial impression, but as you approach the patient and examine more closely, you start to pick up detail that you might otherwise miss.
And we are about done, so I'll just quickly flip through. This is a major commission piece in our hospital atrium, and it's by Spencer Finch. If you go to the 9/11 Museum and Memorial while you're here in New York, you'll see a major piece by Spencer Finch. This is another example of very contemporary work where we can look at color and layering and subtle differences. We have 2 different sizes of glass and 3 different levels of opacity. Students are asked to identify those characteristics. And then another piece that just has many layers to it, and we kind of deconstruct this. We don't necessarily relate this to the clinical experience, but it is just a really good example of kind of analyzing contemporary art and exposing them to that in their lives. And I think that's it.
While Vita and Julia get ready for the presentation, I would like just to take a minute to say how this program came about. And it came about from 2 serendipitous circumstances. The first one is that I have an interest in physical exam. I run the physical diagnosis program at our school, and I authored a book in it. And back in the 90s, I wrote a series of papers about the fact that basic clinical skills seem to be lacking in physicians in training, and I had the good luck of meeting people that still do physical exam and write about it, and I realized that they were all humanists. So that was the first thing that kind of caught my eye. And then another thing that happened is that trying to incentivize physical exam in our students, I created a program where I had some humanities tidbits. And the third-year clerks that took that program at the very beginning loved the pieces I was showing. I was showing videos of stories of Mike Lacombe, for example. They were getting emotional, they were crying, they were asking for references. And by the end of the third year, they looked jaded, they beeped themselves out of the room, they fell asleep. And I told a psychometrician whose cubicle was next to mine, and he smiled and he said their empathy died. And that led basically to the creation of the Jefferson Empathy Scale. So this program that they're going to tell you is just a piece of a much larger humanities program we have at Jeff. And the idea is that if indeed we're creating technicians and we want to go back to creating well-rounded healers, maybe the humanities have to come back. And this is just a piece of a much larger program. We do theater, we do dance, we do visual arts, we do reflective writing, we do movies, we do history of medicine, meditation, mindfulness. So there is a lot of music that goes into this program, and this is a very important piece.
Thank you, Sal. Thanks for the introduction. And of course, we will just talk about this very small part of a much larger and really amazing program at Jefferson. The collaboration between Jefferson and Fleischer is a really unique one. Fleischer Art Memorial is a community art school. So in a sense, I think it's probably one of the only partnerships like that. And I think it has really incredible and far-reaching potential that we're still thinking through. But to give you a little introduction, Fleischer Art Memorial is recognized as the first and the oldest community art school in the nation. Its mission is to make art accessible to everyone, regardless of economic means, background, or artistic experience, and it arises from the vision of its founder, Samuel Fleischer. Fleischer believed that art is one of society's greatest assets and equalizers, and is essential to joyful, productive, and rewarding life. In 1898, he established the Graphic Sketch Club, where individuals, especially those from South Philadelphia's low-income and immigrant neighborhoods, could learn art making and in free classes. Today, Fleischer is celebrated as a thriving community arts center, serving more than 17,000 people annually with both adult, children, and youth, and exhibition programs, offering free and incredibly low-cost classes in almost virtually every art media. We believe that art enriches and transforms every individual, and as such has potential to enrich our communities. So part of our motivation in partnering with Jefferson was the hope that supporting the development of future doctors will really help to strengthen and benefit the community as a whole. Sal came to us in 2012 seeking a collaboration and a creation of a specifically designed program. And together with Jefferson faculty and esteemed Fleischer faculty and teaching artists, we created a specifically targeted program which we call Seeing with a Better Eye, Drawing as a Way to Foster Medical Students' Observational Skills. The program consists of two 10-week courses, a basic and an advanced. It's one session for 2 hours every week for 10 weeks, and a shorter anatomy sketching workshop, which is a 3-session workshop. It targets first and second year medical students, and since 2014, we've had about 260 medical students participating. The classes take place at Fleischer, which is only blocks away from Jefferson, which is fairly convenient, and are taught by Julia. The class fulfills a humanities requirement. So it's an elective, but it fulfills one of the requirements. It's one of the many programs they can take. So the heart of our program is the introductory basic drawing class, basic drawing seeing with different eyes. Fleischer's own curriculum, adult curriculum program is identifies drawing classes as an entry point for beginners, for people who might not know how to draw, might not think they are creative at all. What we recommend is to take the very basic drawing class, and it's a kind of doorway to fostering a creative practice. Fleischer offers about 15 different basic drawing classes each term, so that's about 60 a year, which we recommend as a foundational platform for students. So the basic drawing seeing with different eyes class, which Julia teaches, is one of the classes she teaches in this program, and it's the very basic one. Students begin by working from self-observation to still life, skeletal material, photographs, and live figure models. Exercises are structured to help deconstruct observational drawing and offer a step-by-step approach to the process. These exercises help to demystify the act of drawing, as many novice practitioners and non-practitioners are plagued with the misconception that drawing is an inborn skill, nature's gift, rather than a set of tools to acquire through study and practice. So that's an important thing we focus on. Building on a premise that a rigorous drawing practice would increase observational skills, the curriculum also includes specialized drawing and visualization exercises that are meant to build a visual vocabulary to help access visual and spatial thinking more fluidly. Some of the drawing exercises Julia will talk about in a little bit are also specifically targeted for perceptual training and improved visual acuity in medical diagnostics. We're all inspired by Frederick Frank's quote, "If there's something I have learned, is that if what I have not drawn, I have never really seen." So I think as artists and managers of art programs, seeing what the practice itself can do for an individual and how it can affect the individual. So is that how much time I have left? Oh, no. I'm just going to go on really quickly to talk about been mentioned briefly that a lot of our curriculum is based on Betty Edwards' very classic book, which she wrote in the 70s, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And what's nice about this is that it gives you a real structure into teaching and the pedagogy of drawing. And she really bases it on 5 perceptions, which you can look through later. And Julia can talk about some of the specific curricula.
It's okay. Okay, where's the cookie thing? Thanks. All right, so here we have the curriculum outline for the basic drawing course. As Vita said, we really consider this basic drawing course to be the heart of the visual arts program. And in the past 2 years, we've built upon it. We've added other classes. So just to briefly describe how this class fits into all of the other classes, the anatomy sketching workshop that we mentioned earlier has a similar curriculum to what you see here. It's just much briefer. It only meets for 3 sessions, and it's synchronized with the student's anatomy block. The advanced drawing course that we offer is 10 weeks, so it's structured very similarly to the course you see here, the basic drawing course. But in addition to focusing on fundamental drawing concepts, the subject matter is exclusively the human face and the body. Oops. Okay. I did something wrong. There we go. So if you look at the lower right hand image, I know I'm going over, I apologize. If you look at the lower right hand image, this is an example of one of the exercises we do in that more advanced drawing class, and I'm going to briefly describe it. In this exercise, I ask students to draw from a photograph of an individual's face. I let the students know that that individual does have a medical condition, but I do not disclose what the condition is. As the students draw, they are forced to look extremely closely at the shapes and proportions of the subject's face. Just through the nature of observational drawing, it's something that happens, so that by the end of class, we're able to have a really robust group discussion about what they noticed as they were drawing, what they discovered about different aspects of this person's face. Then it becomes sort of a game where they guess what the individual has. After I disclose the condition at the end of class, this particular individual had muscular dystrophy, we have another discussion about what perhaps they didn't see and what the telltale signs are. The image in the lower left, you might have noticed in the previous slide, we do a pre-instruction self-portrait and a post-instruction self-portrait at the end of the 10 weeks. This is in that basic level drawing class. I think that this image really shows how much more the student is seeing at the end of these 10 weeks, how much more clearly she is seeing, how much more accurately she is seeing. And then at the upper left, this is a really classic drawing exercise I'm sure many of you are familiar with if you're artists or art educators. It's all about seeing tones or shades of light and dark. We do this exercise in the basic drawing class, but after I had been teaching this for about a year, I was told by the anatomy coordinator, Dr. Elizabeth Spudik, who I actually work with for the anatomy sketching workshop, that seeing values, being able to pick up on those subtle fluctuations in grays, is actually a critical skill for reading images like x-rays and MRI scans. So Dr. Spudik and I continued to work together to develop exercises in the 3-night anatomy sketching workshop where students learn about this concept of value and then actually draw from MRI scans. So I think this is just a great example of how the practice of drawing can directly affect the practice of medicine. Real briefly, evaluations, I think that these speak for themselves. I can say just from, nope, we gotta go. Okay, thanks.
So we have just a few minutes for some questions. Any questions? Go for it.
I have a couple questions. First one is for the Dallas crowd, Heather, et cetera. Have you tried to take the students into the dermatology clinics and to see patients where it's not quite as controlled as a photographic situation? I'm curious what the experience is like.
The answer is yes, but not into the clinic. So not as part of this course. We don't do that. But one of the things that we do for every medical student as they go because dermatology is relegated in most schools to the elective years. We have intercalated ourselves into the internal medicine clerkship, and once a week we meet a group of 5 students, and we have a very large inpatient consult service just for dermatology at Parkland. And so we figure out who the inpatients are that have rashes, and we meet these students, and we go to the bedside, and they do close examination and description, utilizing, their visual skills and their descriptive skills to try and arrive at what they think the diagnosis the patient has. And that's open to all the medical students. Actually, it's part of their curriculum. So.
This is just such a novel curriculum, the intensive drawing at the medical school level. I'm curious what you've noticed, I guess it's right there on the slide, that's changed. What do you notice, and what do they notice?
Well, the subjective, go ahead.
I would just say that in addition to these evaluations, both Dr. Manjonia and I often receive unsolicited feedback from the students. They truly love the program. It's a huge stress relief. That's something I've been hearing in a lot of other presentations. It's not necessarily our primary objective, but it is a huge stress relief for them. We feel that it prevents burnout. And they say that it helps them see better. I have students that participate in with the clinics, student-run clinics, and they participate in the student-run clinics at the same time that they participate in the drawing courses, and they will tell me about how they are seeing their patients better, and they are really looking at their patients in a deeper way as a result of the drawing class.
I think it's a good question because unfortunately when you're trying to sell a program like that to the bean counters, they want numbers. And I'm not sure we really measure what is happening. We know that something big is happening, and I guess to sum it up, most students say, "Thank you, that kept my sanity." And this seems to be the refrain for all the programs we do. We have a theater program that actually some students wanted to continue because it kept my sanity. I'm not really sure what I'm measuring, and I'm sitting on tons of data captures that, which is a pity, because then, of course, if I go to the dean to continue this program, he wants that kind of feedback. So we're measuring tolerance for ambiguity, empathy, visual spatial thinking. We measure wisdom. We measure the capacity to pick up findings, and I'm actually going to analyze it now. But I'm afraid that I may find nothing, but I do know that it does quite a bit.
It's not. The theater module is a more classic sort of text and subtext examination. There is a nice handoff between the dance and movement therapy, where there is dance and movement as sort of an experienced experience, and then one as an observed experience, and what you're portraying when you move and voice and use particular words, and how you bring those together to embody a role, and what your patient is embodying for you when they're sitting in front of you.
With regard to the drawing course, way back in 1982 in Philadelphia, at the medical school, there was a precursor to Harmony. Was it Medical College of Wilmington?
Medical College of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, okay. So at that time, there was Professor Wegerman, who was professor of art at Bryn Mawr, I think.
At Haverford.
At Haverford, was it? Okay. And so the school decided that they wanted to introduce some humanism into the medical school curriculum, and they hired a clergyman and also an artist, which was Professor Wegerman. And they told him, you can do anything you want for 2
Thank you, guys. That was great. We really appreciate it.
Bonnie Pittman asked me to tell everyone to please sign up for tours and be back at 5. She had to tell all the other groups, so I was consulted and said I would agree.
The assessment. What did you Flanders?
Anyway. Well, I mean, you and me both. I'm increasingly
I know, it's like you're getting moving in so many directions. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we need to.
But, I mean, I know that didn't read half of it. And you probably too, some artists who would be fantastic. Oh, yeah. To lead this, I mean, I don't have to lead the class, you don't have to lead the class, but, you know, to include that as part of the curriculum, I don't know what that would take. And I've talked about it with Chuck Ginsburg, and he's like, I mean, his mind goes in the gutter.
As a separate class, like you could do a whole separate elective
Right.
that's
Absolutely.
drawing and hands-on.
Oh,
rather than
absolutely.
trying to make it part of this.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant.
You know, I think it was
Sally
Sally
Stegman, just kind of like we're doing. You know, you start with that kind of classical. Go ahead.
I think it's Stegman. Subjects, so it's a non-sequitur. That empathy exercise with that sarcophagus for little girls. And they had to write, I was like, that, where they had to could only write one sentence of what they
That was
would say.
brilliant.
And we've
Because I'm
done
like,
that
you're putting
line poetry.
yourself
It's really fun.
into the
I love it.
I like the photo one where they draw from that.
They're like, I am that person.
And then
Or
like
they
an
wrote-
objective view.
Yeah. They say like what, how that person sees the world.
Yeah.
Or something
Yeah.
like what, how they
I like
embody
those too.
I did too, because I was like, you're having to
Really
essentially put your empathize.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it is very hard to take the concept of copy and figure out how
do you
to
teach
instill
that?
it.
That's right.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
And that was a brilliant exercise. And if we do this class in the fall, and I know
Is it?
there's been discussion.
Well, we haven't, we have to select dates, but I think it's all I have to do. And then I contact
We could
Betty
incorporate some of this.
Shaw and,
We can incorporate some of this, and I think it would be.
all we need is sort of at least 10 contacts. It's supposed to get credit for the students to get credit as an elective, it has to be 10. So you have to have
At least 5
sessions. But they usually say at least, recommend at least 6 because students might.
And they would start in.
I think that we would start it.
Yeah.
December is still in, but maybe I could show up. Maybe I could like still come.
Who's like, well,
I was gonna ask Lindsay. Well, there's gonna be lots. I'm making my mature decision right now. I was thinking of Lindsay, the manager of business, to meet. Yeah, she's
that's nice.
Well, and if we do a session at Clements, that curriculum is essentially done. We can use that
It's so
linearity.
sad we didn't incorporate the Sivenin piece.
Yes,
I don't know
it's
why. Probably because you weren't there.
Probably. I mean,
I didn't know.
It's okay. I mean, it's on the third time. So it's.
I have so older, short hair, gray hair. She's very nice, but she's a little bit.
Well, for this, for docents, we're gonna start including docents. I have a list of like 6 or 7 who are all in positions and they're super interested.
Yeah.
So I was gonna target.
I know
that was.
Robinson is interested in this sort of thing.
She didn't indicate. We gave them an opportunity to tell them what for them to tell us what they were interested in. She did not.
Okay, good. Because I was paired with her in the MS Zero Day, and she was sort of like.
She's not my favorite.
She's not what?
She's not my favorite.
Like the students were like.
Yeah,
and she was just like, and this is
She's
blah,
really
blah,
intense.
blah.
I know. I'm like, I'll still take the water.
We can have the water.
Please take it. Thank you.
I know, that's actually one of the things that's resonating with me the most.
So thank you very much.
But it's such an interesting model, I guess that's the culture change. What the values. Really fast. We do. I'm doing almost the next thing. Nice to see you too. At the podium, at the table. Yeah. Oh my God, it was funny. And then Liz. Will we present from up there or just present from here?
I think you can present
Yeah,
from here.
okay.
I think it's better. I think
Yeah.
it's more of a conversation,
Okay.
so you can
Okay, I'm going to try really hard to
just
do this
start
in
here.
3 minutes.
Maybe I'll just start from up here because I need to look at my thing where the light, under the light.
We meet again. My thoughts, 'cause otherwise I will go on and on and on.
And then, so Joel, if you're at the very end, Jamie will be between. Yep.
Interesting. I worked with her up at the Peabody Essex Museum, but very briefly.
When she was a monk.
Yeah.
Because I almost snagged one, a big water drink.
Yeah.
At the time I was doing something called that.
So you had a.
Actually, she did it before, and so she was
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good, good. I think she's doing a lot of just observing and listening. You know, it's an exciting time in New York. I'm in New York, and like it's, we're just building. I think there's a lot of closure we're in, and ready for the next exciting thing. Yeah. Oh, that's great. So yes, we are. It's funny at the museum. It's like we've now gone to PF and PB just because. Yeah. It's so confusing. They're both big, strong people in their own rights. Yeah. Oh, good. Because I always go to. Do you? Yeah, I'm trying to not to.
You can have some of my time.
Okay, thank you.
Travis Glasgow, he's still around, I think. He's running as a good. Glad.
Oh yeah, isn't that great? It's such a it's hard to reorganize things, I would imagine, because change is so difficult. So you must be good at it.
This time is better and sort of more thorough.
What's that, right?
I also have more resources, which obviously makes a difference.
So you were at, and I presented in ways that you talked to get up and
But as a result of being interested in organization,
Yeah. Yeah, such an interesting. And who do you like? Who are your who do you like to read? Like, who are your kind of gurus in that area?
yeah, I don't really read in the area.
You chat, yeah.
Interested in the whole idea of it.
Sorry.
Hi,
Jamie.
It's interesting. I'm also interested in it, and I've been working as a consultant doing professional development workshops for Fidelity. So and I do, yeah. So around issues of leadership.
So if we were
team. So she started to pass on some. I just am reading right now this book called Teaming, which is really interesting. It's all about how we use teams are one of the stable things.
don't you have to come
Yeah,
here
no,
to go
there's
to
other
reception?
articles that I can never remember the names of the people, but
There
it's
needs to be somebody
really
ringing a bell
interesting. So
outside.
think about basically giving us readings on teamwork and leadership that have been really just, again, it crosses all fields, right?
Yeah, and I worked with
They'll come back in if they're cold.
gave me a recommendation about this book.
I got here late. Well, last night we
Yes, yes.
had our
Yeah.
graduation.
Well, did you see, I don't reference it here, but it definitely, I think back about it, because we are working teams in one way or another.
We had the executive director of the, I don't know if you've heard, but there have been a bunch of different lessons of the
There was a really
Alzheimer's
interesting article
Association
in the New York
chapters
Times
international.
about
New York
Google's
City,
research
yeah,
into
yeah,
leadership.
it was in the Wall Street Journal. The national chapter.
It was
Basically,
really
it's not, it's
nice.
like 85 separate chapters,
They
50
looked
which
at,
way to
yeah, it's in the last 6 weeks, maybe even the last week, they looked at all these different permutations of teams.
national kind of pushed it in November, December. So the executive director, who was the executive director of the New York City chapter, came to our faculty vision
Observing,
very
almost
concerned.
working independently.
We all know him,
And
but
what they observed is that teams that are the most effective
it was an important meeting.
are
Yeah,
the ones that are
Some of them
exactly
come in
at the same time if you have that trust, really, you know? And transparency, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I think we're the only thing between you and a glass of wine, so we want to get started. My name is Liz Goffberg. I am a physician and educator from Harvard Medical School and director of research for the Arnold P. Gold Foundation. And the title for this plenary session is drawn from a quote that's been attributed to Einstein, although the historians in the audience may quibble with that. But the quote is, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." Some of you may have heard the alternative translation, "Not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters." But you get the idea. And I think we might be striking a little bit of a nerve here, given the applause that we heard in the last session when somebody said maybe we shouldn't be evaluating this stuff after all. So this is not going to be a traditional research plenary where our panelists talk about their research projects and share their findings. Instead, I've asked each of our panelists, after they introduce themselves briefly, to share a story reflecting on Einstein's quote. They may tell us about a time that they found themselves counting something that didn't really count and how they ended up in that position and what forces might have been at play to compel them to do such a thing. Or they may share a story about a time that they were engaged in meaningful measurement and what did that look like and what came out of that. They might tell us that they chose not to measure something because they felt that the tools would somehow destroy the very thing that they cared about. And after each of the panelists share their stories, we're going to open it up to a discussion. And I have no illusions that we're going to tie anything up in a neat bow. Instead, I think what we're going to do is begin to elucidate some of the questions that are meaningful to this community and hopefully begin to have a little bit of a roadmap or game plan for steps we might want to take together as a community in terms of research and evaluation. So with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist who will introduce herself and tell us a story.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne Zimmerman, and I am the Director of Visitor Learning at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And I'm just going to say off the bat, I am pretty new to this topic of research and evaluation. But in partnership with medical educators, I work in the areas of team building and burnout, creating programs designed to improve team dynamics and communication, and to provide safe spaces for personal and sometimes brave conversations, workplace hierarchies, communication challenges, failure, feeling overwhelmed, that kind of stuff. And I would say the workshops are generally fun as well. So imagine a medical workshop at an art museum where a multidisciplinary hospital team or a community-based family practice, including residents, attendings, interns, medical students, nurses, and frontline staff, spend time together looking closely at complex works of art and searching for meaning, laughing as they engage in an art-making activity, and at the end sharing personal and clinical stories. In one session, a nurse who has been fairly quiet opens up and talks about her struggles with speaking up and feeling heard. In another, a medical student, with humor, shares a story recounting a moment of shame, but then talks about the difficulties of moving on. Whoops, no. And sometimes the group just remembers a patient that has died. When asked about what they learned about themselves or their team, someone might write, "I need to be a better listener," or "I need to pay more attention to the interns." Back at the hospital or clinic, medical educators report that after the workshop, the team seems to function better, an increased sense of ease amongst team members. As someone put it, kind of a softening. People are more comfortable making eye contact, saying, "I don't know," which the medical educator also said is an act of courage in their world. Because I am a museum educator, as part of each session, all the participants fill out a reflection, which is an opportunity for the participants to process the workshop experience in the moment and helps us understand the ways in which the sessions are meaningful to the participants and gives us insights into some of the challenges of teaming on the program I'm particularly talking about is the Integrated Teaching Unit at the Brigham. We ask questions that help us understand if the time dedicated to these evenings is worthwhile. We ask them how the evenings might be relevant to professional lives. And we ask them to reflect on what they've learned about their team and themselves as team members. And finally, we ask them to share with us some of the challenges their team is currently facing. For the past year, we've worked with over 15 teams, and we have about 75, perhaps more, of these reflection forms. So we have these reflections, but a persistent question has been, how do we, and I'm going to put this in quotation marks, formally evaluate or research these programs? One of the medical educators I work with asked, how can we measure something so internal? And initially, in my mind, formal evaluation meant an outcomes-based evaluation where we would measure the effectiveness of the team with quantitative data. For instance, on rounds, how many times does each team member talk? Thanks to my colleague Peggy Birchinall at the Isabella Stork Gardner Museum, we've had the opportunity to work with evaluation consultant Mariana Adams. And just as in the museum world, we are broadening our conceptions of what constitutes learning, Mariana has been inviting us to broaden our ideas about what constitutes formal evaluation. She's also been pushing us to use measures that are authentic to our programs, and that's actually a theme that I've heard come up several times today. And she's been helping us at the Gardner discover ways in which quantitative data can be embedded in qualitative data. So I now see that the reflection forms, which have been piling up in my office, which we have been systematically collecting, and I think that word systematically collecting is important, as a matter of practice, are a rich treasure trove of data for formal evaluation. It's one thing if during a workshop a participant writes, I realize the value of multiple perspectives even if we don't agree, but it carries a different kind of weight if that thought emerges as part of a consistent pattern across reflections. There are so many stories in this work and so many stories that count and many ways of measuring. And one of the challenges, I think that this has also come up, is asking the right questions. And what I'm learning is that sometimes the most exciting questions can be the questions that emerge from the data itself. And I want to suggest that the process of evaluation can help elucidate what we're really curious about and help crystallize what we value most. So I think when we went into the team building thing, we would measure one thing, and now I think we're kind of moving to a different place. So in the team building program, a big question that's emerging from the reflections is thinking about the role of trust and the willingness to be vulnerable as a characteristic of a well-functioning team. My medical colleagues and I have been talking about how we might research that, and as we move, and we recognize as we move from the evaluations to new areas of inquiry or research, the methods might change. As Mariana Adams says, it's not always about the destination, but sometimes it's about the journey. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Gazer. I'm Chair of Learning and Interpretation at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and I've been there for 2 years, but my work with medical education began when I was head of education and interpretation at the Cleveland Museum of Art, where we were just beginning to build new programs with the really great community of medical professionals in Cleveland. We built multiple partnerships with a variety of medical education institutions. We worked with a variety of participants, from undergraduates to medical students and residents. In terms of evaluation and assessment, we relied on participant reflections. But when it came to applying for grants, we didn't have that quantitative data that was so critically important. So when I came to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, there's a long-standing partnership there with two medical schools, the Baylor College of Medicine and the McGovern Medical School at University of Texas. And we have two long-standing elective courses with medical and dental students at those institutions. Ostensibly, it's called the Art of Observation and involves close looking exercises, working with art, also drawing, but we also touch on issues of empathy and bias in both courses. When I arrived, staff had been implementing quantitative pre and post tests. And I was so intrigued by that. It was attractive that there was a kind of quantitative measure that we could ostensibly then use as we went out to get grants. But what were we really measuring, and was it relevant? So in these tests, each student provided a written description of a work of art, both pre and post. So they used the same work of art. Then a museum educator scored these tests based on the elements of art and the principles of design, which had been discussed in the course. While their scores showed improvement, how was this evidence really relevant for their medical practice? And so I turned to my colleague here, who is really going to, she's considered these topics really carefully and is going to continue the story.
Thank you. Caroline, I'm Rebecca Lundstruth. I am the Associate Director of the McGovern Center for Humanities and Ethics at the McGovern Medical School at the University of Texas Health Science Center. We are having a contest for an acronym. See me afterwards. So on the heels of that, I did successfully receive a grant to try to quantitatively measure the collaboration that we had with the Museum of Fine Arts. And I have it right here. I never published it. I did dust it off for this and basically know why I didn't publish it. It's because we found out that students who took the course had better observation skills than a control group who didn't take the course. Wow. So what does that have to do with what we're trying to achieve in medical education? And let me just tell you the words I heard. What does that have to do with attending, burnout, empathy, wellness, resilience, ambiguity? I'm not sure if it has anything to do with any of that, which is one of the reasons it's still collecting dust. In that same vein, we run a certificate program, Medical Humanities and Ethics certificate program, that spans all 4 years of medical school. And in the second year, students are asked to write a reflection on anything, free form. And I was the advisor to the second year group, and please indulge me while I read part of this reflection. Before I started medical school, I was told, it'll be over before you know it. The beginning of my first year made me think otherwise. It seemed painfully long with too many coffee-filled nights. But now that I am starting my third year, I realize it's true. As med students, you plan your first 2 years of school from one block exam to the next, at times not thinking about anything other than grades and how you're going to learn 2,000 drugs and their side effects. Not only interesting, but stick in your head long enough to take the required exam. I regret not reflecting more throughout medical school. I came to medical school motivated by childhood dreams of becoming a doctor and working on the Texas-Mexico border in a small town or at a Planned Parenthood clinic or with a small nonprofit like the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. I'm still not certain what it is I'll be doing when I grow up, but unless I carve out time to think about what is happening around me, I don't think med school allows much time for one to reflect or look around before the next flood of activities or exams carries you off. At the start of the school year, I enrolled in the Art of Observation course. Despite exposing my apparent lack of observation for the world around me, it was one of my favorite activities of the year. During the first meeting, we went around the room giving our reasons for joining the class. I think many of us participated so we could escape the medical center and the Learning Resource Center for those 2 precious hours each week. For the first time since starting medical school, I felt comfortable. It's been almost 9 months since I completed the Art of Observation. Somehow, in the midst of rote memorization and the stress of recalling information when put on the spot in front of peers and a physician, I realized that I've stopped closely observing the people who are directly in front of me. I have been so nervous when walking into a room to do a history and physical exam that when I've walked back out into the hallway, I couldn't remember if I noticed an IV or Foley catheter. If there was an IV, was it placed in the hand or in the foca? Did I even ask my patients if they needed anything before I left? Thinking back to the art of observation, I appreciate the few moments when I've actually stopped to take a deep breath, to look around, and to think about where I am. Friends, the power is not in the quantitative data that we can collect, but it's in this reflection. It's in those things that we cannot necessarily measure, and it's in these collective stories. So perhaps going forward, what we need to do is mindfully collect these stories and then see how the movement grows from that, as opposed to trying to measure whether our students have better observation skills or not. Thank you.
So I'm Jamie Noble. I'm an assistant professor of neurology at Columbia University Medical School. I'm also the neurology clerkship director there, and I sit on some national committees regarding medical student education. So I wear a number of hats on top of those. I'm the president and co-founder of an organization called Arts and Minds, which provides dementia care programming based in museums, several museums throughout New York City. But I was sitting here thinking about my own reflection, in that it's been almost 18 years since I began medical school, and that first day of medical school really probably defined my career in ways that won't ever be measurable. Because the first patient that John Stone, who was the Dean of Admissions at Emory, sent us out to see, he gave us only one instruction, and that was that we were not to look up the diagnoses of the patient that we were about to go out and meet. And we were sent out to that person's home to see what their life was like being afflicted by disease. But of course, all of us looked up those disorders and just learned as little as we could, but we were absolutely powerless to do anything about them. But we learned a lot about how disease affects the individual. And I think that's what's drawn me to some of the work that I've been doing and the work that we've been doing in the dementia space. We have been struggling with trying to operationalize some of the measures that we have in our programs, similar to ones that were developed out of the MoMA and the Metascapes, and they were really the inspiration of the things that we do now. Whereas anecdotes are typically an interest, and shoestring budgets are often the things that get a program going, we really do need quantitative measures to get them to be sustained, and p-values. As unpalatable as that may be, that is unfortunately the harsh reality. And one of the things I wanted to just bring up is the funding mechanisms that support these kind of things. They begin with endowments and goodwill and certain people being the driving forces in organizations and in schools. But a lot of times, in order to sustain work, especially work that may be grant or research driven, there has to be a mechanism to support not just the work itself, but the individual doing the support. While there are a number of small grant opportunities that are out there, those of us in academia are often encouraged to seek out much larger grant opportunities, and ones that come along with something called indirect cost, which not just sustain the individual, but the university itself. Those are not gained through small private endowments or philanthropic gifts, but they are through large federally oriented grants. There are very few, if any, that are even relevant to the work that we do here. If others know about them, I'd be happy to talk about them, because most of us in medical pedagogy don't know what resources would be out there to even do something in a more profound or multicentric way that I think a lot of us here desire. It is the case that these anecdotes and the attitudes that medical students have through these programs are absolutely valuable. They sculpt their future careers, and they are quantifiable, but not in the ways that we ordinarily think about, and not just us, but maybe the people who ultimately make the decisions about whether they will become part of the curriculum. So it's not just us that we have to convince. I think we're all convinced simply by being in this room, but it's others in our schools that have to be convinced as well. I think it's also important that we try to link whatever measures that we have to not just current structures that we have for medical student evaluations and resident evaluations, but ones that are coming down the line, ones that are often milestone or competency oriented. And especially in the context of medical student education, these are coming in the form of something called entrustable professional activities, which are the basic everyday things that physicians do, from communicating, to writing notes, to demonstrating procedures. So anything we can do to be a bit ahead of the curve in that regard, I think will be very, very helpful. And then finally, I also want to make sure that those of you in the audience and those beyond our audience who may see this in some form don't see this as being something that's unachievable. Those of us up here are very fortunate in having a wealth of resources often behind us. And it wasn't lost on me that we have Columbia and Harvard as the representative schools up here, when there are many others that are out there with very different infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I'm Joel Katz at Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard. And as you can see, there's quite a variety of perspectives presented. I think that Joel Howell did a beautiful job of presenting one extreme of this debate, which was very appealing. And my role on this panel is to be the curmudgeon and to present a minority report, if you will. And as requested, I'm going to do so through a story. And that story goes back to when the first quarter century of my existence, I was an art student and a graphic artist and professional artist. And eventually I migrated towards medicine. And when I did get to medicine, I put down my drawing pens and paintbrushes, and I sort of knew somehow intuitively that I would somehow pick them up in some way, but I had no idea what that would be. And then fast forward to about 2001 or 2002, a group of Harvard medical students had read Dr. Braverman's article in JAMA, and they decided that this might be a novel way to improve the curriculum, and they went to our dean, Dan Fetterman, who I think many of you know, and I think he was eager to get them out of the office and knew my background, so he said, "Why don't you go see Dr. Katz?" And a group of fabulous Harvard medical students, including Rachel Dubroff. Are you here, Rachel? Where's Rachel? There's Rachel right there. Came into my office and showed me this with the Braverman article in their hand and said, "How are we going to, we can improve medical education here, let's do it." And I actually agreed with them. I thought it was a great idea. And so we got a small group of faculty together, and we brainstormed on how we might do it, how we might extend on the Yale work and to make it, change it, make it more in-depth in many ways. And we went very proudly and enthusiastically to the Harvard Medical School Committee on Curriculum and Credits. And they listened to us, our nice presentation, our 11-minute presentation, and then they told us, thanks but no thanks. We're not interested in that course. And we said, why? And they said, well, there are two issues. One issue is that our curriculum is already absolutely packed. There's molecular biology, genetics, advances coming up all the time, and our faculty don't have time to teach those. How can we possibly devote time to art? And then the second thing they said was, it did not pass our David Letterman test. And we said, what's the David Letterman test? And they said, would we be embarrassed if this showed up on David Letterman? Yes, we would. So they sent us packing. So rather than close up shop, a number of us decided that we would prove to them. And I think in some sense, that was our best success, that they said no to us. So we designed a randomized trial where we looked at outcomes that we thought were valid, and we got a nice research team together, including Alexa Miller right there, and Rachel and Sheila. Where's Sheila? Nagshina was actually a fantastic fourth-year Harvard medical student who's here today, and she was the lead as her senior project. And we put on a pilot, and we studied in a randomized fashion the outcomes that we thought were valid. And it was accepted for publication in a major journal. And then only after that happened, Harvard Medical School said, okay, you can do the course. So my points are that it's a gray line. It's not, this is a complicated topic, but I think a number of things to take out. Number one, we in this room are convinced of the value, but we in this room are not necessarily the people making the decisions. The second is that if Dr. Braverman hadn't put his study together and had a p-value that's successful, got into JAMA, Rachel wouldn't have had it in her hand to bring to me. And so it has an increased power, a magnification of impact when you can, in a real way show that it's effective. And then I think it also has additive benefits. It helps the careers of those of you who are doing it. I will tell you that for the first 4 or 5 years of my doing this, I did not tell my chair I was doing this. I was afraid I would get fired. And only after the students started coming to him and saying, wow, this is valuable, and our publication started to roll out, then it got credibility, I got time and space to do this, and it started to attract funding. So I guess my point is that I think the challenge is to find meaningful outcomes, because it's easy to find outcomes that are not meaningful. And the real challenge is to find meaningful outcomes, and I think that's where our discussion should be in a way, to help move the field forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
So we have about 15 more minutes for this session, and we'll engage in a discussion with the audience, and then we'll end maybe with about 2 minutes to spare, and I'll try to summarize what we've talked about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, because I know she has a couple of announcements before we break for the reception. So let's pick it up with the question that Joel just asked us. What questions do we feel are meaningful? What outcomes do we care about? Does anybody? Yeah, back here?
Yeah, I think that if we take the view from 30,000 feet and we ask what are meaningful outcomes, there are many meaningful outcomes, and some of them are quantitative. But I don't think we should let the obsession with quantitative analysis control us. Many of us work in institutions that have wonderful departments of anthropology, wonderful departments of sociology, wonderful departments that do serious work that doesn't rest on a p-value. And they are no less scholarly and no less meaningful. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is the point? And I think one of the points is that we want to see these programs flourish and prosper and spread. And to do that, you have to remember, I think, that all politics is local. And there's wonderful examples on the panel here of people who have infiltrated their local politics and in meaningful ways. I mean, we have 2 clerkship directors sitting up there. That's a very powerful position. And once you're in that position, you are in a position to conduct more infiltration. The other thing to remember is, let's keep this in perspective. We're cheap. We're very cheap. At my institution, if we want to hire a new basic scientist, somebody fresh out of their postdoc, somebody that looks pretty good, but they haven't really done much yet, we hope they'll do a lot. We're looking at startup packages that are into the 7 figures. And I don't think we're unique. I think that's true at the other academic institutions that are represented up there. And so the chairs of our departments, when they recruit 5 people, well, you can do the math. There's a lot of money at play there, and we don't cost a fraction of that. And so if we can convince them that what we're doing is worthwhile, I think that the funds can be found. And the last suggestion, one of the great impetuses to do something is that the guy down the street is doing it, and we don't want to fall behind the guy down the street. So to the extent that we can point to programs like Harvard, like Columbia, and say they're doing it, we want to emulate them, that's powerful. And we might want to think about some kind of a best practices guide, some kind of a position paper, some kind of a statement that says this is what an art and medicine program looks like. This is what makes it good. These are what the things you ought to look for. And once that's out, if that could be published, then you can take that to another institution and say, see, what we're doing is good. This is what a good program looks like. This is what our program looks like. And you should support us.
Thank you, Joel. I just want to highlight your point about, do we as a community want to try to come up with accepted standards for scholarship in this domain? I mean, the panelists sort of talked a little bit about the classic dichotomy between qualitative and quantitative methodologies, but you're raising the issue that we can get more nuanced and really dig deeply about what methodologies match our interests. And then, just like they did in the quality improvement literature that many of you know about, there are these new Squire guidelines. Because it was so hard to get quality improvement projects published in the medical literature, a group of clinicians came up with these guidelines for reporting, for describing the context in which the interventions were being embedded, for reporting results. And do we want to sort of outline accepted standards for scholarship that others will look to? Thank you. Right down here? Sorry, right over here, Jay?
Hello. This one's on. May have just died, but.
Hey, Jay Baruch, Brown Medical School. I have a couple of comments, and I'll muddy the waters even further. So first is, I think it's when you talk about what are meaningful outcomes, I think that's a great question, but it also is complicated further because what some of us are doing at different institutions are different. Like we're not all after the same thing. And even within an institution, there might be programs that are focusing on different goals and different objectives. So it's tough to sort of put everything under one umbrella. Secondly, I have a problem with the outcomes that we've already had, and even some of the wonderful work that's been published, because I really don't care about how students think right after a course. You know, because they're going to have a whiff of this is a breath of fresh air. This is what I want. What we're working on is trying to get more creative thinking and then to get our students to think differently and to ask different types of questions. I want that under the pressure of clinical practice. You know, getting back to what Joel said about, that ultimately the benefit is our patients, right? And so it's not just what are you measuring, but when are you measuring it? You know, so it's not just when they come out of the course and they're in their lecture halls. We're all brilliant in lecture halls. You know, the mistakes, and it becomes complicated when we actually take care of patients. So is there some way to infiltrate measures into OSCEs, you know, as you move forward and try to sort of fold that into sort of pervading medical education metrics already, methodologies that are already, but also like can you establish some kind of longitudinal program, which is like, you know, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, where somehow you're coming back to people and trying to sort of get their feedback, even if it is still quantitative, maybe you're getting more of an impact factor about the value of the work.
So what's the endurance, even if you see changes immediately after? Are they sustained?
I would just want to follow up and say that I think part of that also is how do we reinforce the skills that are learned in these programs over time so that then they can continue to be measured. Yeah.
Great. Joe? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you all. You know, I was going to say a few years ago, Daryl Kirsch, who's president of AMC, gave a very compelling talk about culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And so one of the things that really counts right now might be affecting the culture of institutions, the culture of medicine in general. And I think that might be one thing to try and measure. You know, in addition to what happens to the individual, what's happening to the culture of the institution, the culture of medicine, the learning environment. There's all this focus from the LCME on the learning environment. I don't know what the cultures of art museums right now, but I know the cultures of medicine and medical schools are kind of toxic right now. They're exactly what you described, of people that are surfeited by science and in this minefield of tests and stuff. So how is it that this can alleviate some of the things? The other comment I have is there's a great book out by a guy named Daniel Pink called Drive, and it's about, what really, it's a new operating system in a way. It's about what is our internal motivations, or the things that make things happen, and that all kinds of companies have now adopted this kind of stuff with all kinds of profits happening. You know what I mean? The bottom line is it's working for the companies. And I don't know if there's a way to connect culture, drive, awakening what the students came into medicine for, what they wanted, and making the culture more more to their liking rather than as toxic as it is, and more to the liking of the faculty too.
So I think that's a great comment. So as for the museum educators, this medical students take this very long exit exam that in part measures the culture of the medical school as they exit. And I think our challenge, because we get a snapshot of how our graduating students feel about their experience over 4 years. And unfortunately, though, I mean, this is one of many programs that we are all doing. And so how do we take credit to some of the points that were made for what we're doing? Because we can't measure what it was that drove the positive culture or combated against the negative culture. I think that's another challenge, but I loved what you had to say.
I also wanted to point out, how could you connect all of those? I feel like a lot of companies are priding themselves on turning their cultures around, saying Amazon showed it had a terrible culture and like a vilified, where Google works people really hard, but they've showed that they have a great culture. So I do think there is a way to connect change in culture to value and into numbers and dollars.
So I just wanted to make a comment back about your LCME comment. So just those of you who don't know that every medical school has an accrediting body called the LCME. And one of the most sensitive things that comes about is this learning environment. And it's not just something that's measured on the graduate questionnaires you were referring to, but it's something that's continuously measured across every clerkship. And so there may actually be some near-term goals. I actually think that's a great idea. It's something that's on the top of a lot of medical schools' radars because it is one of the things that can really jeopardize the medical school's accreditation. Even though it's unlikely that a lot of these medical schools will lose it, it's definitely something they don't want to have brought out into public about a toxic learning environment. And toxic learning environment, is beyond something like racism, sexism. It's, being ignored, being dismissed, being marginalized as a shadowing student. And also to some degree having the difficulty and being publicly acknowledged in a negative light for not being able to navigate uncertainty. And that's maybe one of the things that we could really help to target and show some near-term goals. So I like the comments about having some sort of standards in this field, and definitely I think medical schools would pay attention to an LCME standard if you could target that.
Great. Joel?
I just wanted to add one comment going back to Jay's previous comment. And I agree totally that the longitudinal issue is important and it's very difficult to measure. And I just want to give you one example of what I mean by meaningful outcomes that might illustrate this. So Corinne is the director of our ITU team building curriculum, which she just talked about, and you're trying to build collaboration, respect, things like that in this multidisciplinary interprofessional team. You might say, well, gee, you could measure that with satisfaction. That would go up. People would be happy about it. I'm confident about that. You could say, well, let's maybe some attitudes. People might change their attitudes. But what I'm talking about is something a little different. I'm talking about if you're going to hypothesize that this team is suddenly gone from a somewhat dysfunctional team to now a highly respecting and functional team, nurses should be speaking up more frequently on rounds, and rounds should go quicker, and the interns should be spending more time with their patients, and things like that. And those are the kind of outcomes that if you're creative, potentially, it's not the only outcome, but it added to other types of outcomes. Those are the types of things I think that would convince people that it could be clinically relevant.
Medical errors,
Yeah.
work hours.
Medical errors, work hours, length of stay, mortality potentially. That's the ultimate one. It's a challenge. It's going to take a big study, but we can do it.
Yes, right here.
Thank you.
We have time for I'm told, two more responses. Yeah, whoever has the mics, you got them.
I thought we were doing really well. I thought we were getting along, and we did up until about 10 minutes ago, I think. I'm very sympathetic, and I understand, Rebecca, your point of view, Joel, and I'm sorry, can't remember. Yes. Being part of the partnership.
Can you say your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Linda Friedlander, Yale Center for British Art. Erwin Braverman and I knew that we would never get our program accepted unless we could show the data. And it reminds me of our culture, which is so steeped in measurement, working in museums, working with school systems all the time, having to address the Common Core, it really ties our hands up in terms of being more creative than we could be, and doing more kinds of things that we can be. I think that, I don't know if it has to do with science and art, but I think a lot of what we've been able to accomplish in a museum has been not because we had to prove that it works by quote-unquote scientific methods. Rebecca, I agree that I think the reflections and the stories by our medical students are very, very powerful evidence about what the experience was like for them, and they don't do it right after. We have them wait weeks before they write about it, and I think I've always felt for the last 18 years that we've learned more about what the experience has been like in the museum setting based on what the students have said and what they've talked about. I've gotten a lot of inquiries from museums all over that says, you haven't published anything since your original study back in 2001. How come? And I guess part of it is that felt that we continued to be successful. Our program has grown in many, many ways, as have many other museums here as well. And also, we just didn't know how to do it. We didn't know how to do longitudinal studies because once you exit out of medical school and you go into residencies, you disperse. And it's very difficult to find any long-term numbers to prove if we need to prove. So I don't know what my question is. So somebody can help me out here.
You brought out a lot of great themes. Thank you, Linda.
Okay.
Well, I have a comment and I have a proposal that will hopefully address some of that. First of all, I think to sum up, I'm Adam Ratner from San Antonio, and what we're talking about is legitimacy. And I have a proposal. I think we have a critical mass here if we're so inclined, but perhaps what we ought to consider is creating an accreditation organization to legitimize what we're doing, and then ultimately make it a standard for every medical institution to have one. That's my proposal.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe we have time for one more. Rick Wellish.
You know, it occurs to me that what I'm not sort of quite sure what to measure, how to find it meaningful. I guess my brain goes back to in medicine. There are certain things that we have measures for. They're really only surrogate markers for the things we want to measure. In heart physiology, in lung physiology, that's how we operate. You can't put your hand inside the heart and see how much blood it holds. It's just not very practical. And so we find other ways of doing that. And so it got me thinking, are there other surrogate markers to measure the things that might be important for us? There's qualitative research on happiness. It just doesn't get more sort of ethereal than that, you know. But there is qualitative research. There's instruments to measure burnout, to measure wellness, to measure our attitudes towards empathy. There's Press-Ganey scores for patients who get discharged from hospitals around satisfaction. With a whole number of things, including was the bed soft enough and clean, you know, to other aspects of their care. And so the question of how do we find a surrogate marker that will sort of tell us that what we're doing is a good thing. And I don't have anything more helpful than that, but I think that the idea of a surrogacy marker might be
Sometimes
interesting.
more than one surrogate marker. You can triangulate things so that you're approximating the thing that you're looking at. We really are. Oh, okay, Martin. All right. Do we have time for one more? And I'm not going to do the whole summary thing that I said I was going to do. Yeah. this has been the beginning of such a rich conversation that I hope will continue, and that as a group we can continue to discuss and really steer a course. I want to mention an article that I just read yesterday by Fred Hafferty and Tina Martimianakis in Academic Medicine from the last few months, which raised the tension between how much of the role as medical educators is to carry on the values and traditions of our forebears, this lineage, and how much of it is to be subversive. And how much of it do we want to train our students to make change? And there's this balance, there's this tension between being part of the academy and actually playing by those rules and coming up with new ways. So we're at that edge, I hear, in this conversation. And, you know, let's keep talking about it. Great, thanks. And thanks, everybody, for your comments. And thank you to our panelists.
Just one more thing, a few wrap-up things, if you don't mind just waiting. First of all, I want to thank the panel. It was incredibly diverse and exciting to hear all of your points of view, and Elizabeth for organizing this. It was great. I want to remind you, if you have not signed up for a demonstration tour tomorrow, there are places at the Met and at MoMA, and we encourage you to do that because you cannot just appear. You have to have your green sheet or red sheet or whatever they're called, and we need to give the different museums their security lists tonight. So please remember to do that. And I highly recommend that they're going to be fantastic presentations. Also, let's see, Valerie, are you here, Valerie Bell? Valerie, you signed up for 2 sessions, so if you could clarify that, that would be really helpful. Don't do it with me, just go out and talk to Sarah or Katrina. Helen Chappell, we need you to pick up your name tag. Please wear your name tags tomorrow because they're going to be helpful getting you in. I want to thank all the presenters and moderators today. It was an incredible feast of ideas and new expressions of thinking and collaboration. And I want to thank all of you as participants for your great questions and the time that you've given us. Please bring your ideas and conversation, just as Liz pointed out, to tomorrow afternoon sessions, because we're really going to be focusing on, you know, what did you get out of this session, but very importantly, what should we be thinking about in the future? And your contributions are going to make a huge difference. Even diverse points of view are important to have. One of the questions I've been asked a lot is these great slide presentations, both in the breakout groups and here. We're going to figure out a way to load them on the Edith O'Donnell website so that you'll have all this information available to you. So we're very happy about that. And then finally, I want to thank Wendy and Carrie and Rebecca and
And Bonnie?
No, I haven't finished my thank yous. Oh, and the great MoMA team who have been here, along with Edith O'Donnell team, who have made Katrina and Sarah and Sarah, it's very confusing right now. We have 2 Sarahs in the room. So we all thank you from the bottom of our heart, because things move so wonderfully today. I know I was tough on timing, but that was just part of the deal. And you sign up, and it's I'm like a drill sergeant. The last thing I wanted to mention is our heartfelt thanks to the 3 museums, the Met, MoMA, and excuse me, and the Frick. And each of those teams have been organized by your tours tomorrow. Your demonstration tours are organized in very complex ways. And the 3 institutions who are hosting you, I'm so grateful to Rika and Rebecca and Carrie. You cannot begin to imagine. I, of course, had the original idea that we'd do 25 tours and we just keep moving people around, and sanity prevailed. They took over. They said, this is, then they started shifting things, and it was great. So even I can be controlled. Anyhow, I want to invite you to the reception and enjoy meeting other people. And thank you for your gift of time today and for being with us.